Chapter 99. Behind Gerald, another 40 or so people appeared. These people quickly dispersed as soon as they appeared. Looking at their equipment and movement speed, there was a huge difference between them and the warriors from before. At the same time, a row of archers appeared on the rooftops on the right side of the street. The sharp tips of their arrows shone under the sunlight, causing people's hearts to palpitate. The people who were running on the street just now had all disappeared. The originally crowded street suddenly became somewhat empty. A deathly silence enveloped the entire street. Not even the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. The group of people just stood there quietly. Hazel's body was tense, but he still said sarcastically, "You can actually speak? It's really worth celebrating." Gerald was covered from head to toe in armor. Only a pair of eyes could be seen through the gaps of the helmet. His eyes revealed a murderous aura, causing people to tremble in fear. Not being able to kill me last time was the biggest mistake of your life. Hazel, my baby, are you ready to die? Gerald spoke very slowly, squeezing every word out of his mouth. His voice was a bit weird, like the screeching of metal, which gave him an indescribable feeling. Sunir, who was far away, also had a shocked expression on her face. Hazel is very meticulous. How could Gerald still be alive? Is this guy very strong? Hanjin looked at Gerald, who was wrapped in iron from afar. Not very strong. Sunir smiled bitterly. Very strong. Hanjin rarely heard Sunir make such an evaluation. He couldn't help but look at her in surprise. Sasu also said, "I heard that Gerald is Dismark's #1 general. He wears heavy armor all day long and is known as the Bloody Knight. Could he really be that Gerald?" Gerald may not be a general when it comes to commanding an army, but in terms of individual strength, no one under Dismark can compare to him. Sunir explained. Hanjin couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he heard this. Gerald's murderous nature is especially strong. The title of Bloody Knight is too fitting. The number of people who have died in his hands is simply too many to count. His cruelty, even compared to the vampire King Caroline, he might not lose to that devil, Sunir said worriedly. Hanjin frowned. Retreating was definitely not an option. The surrounding city gates were all sealed. If they stayed in the city, they would be found out sooner or later. But if they moved forward with their strength, it was very likely that they were no match for Gerald. This seemed like a dead end. Hanjin was lost. "You think I can't kill you just because you're wearing an iron shell?" Hazel sneered. Her palms were already sweating. She was very clear about Gerald's strength. Even if Gerald was alone, they were no match for him in a head-on clash. "Huh!" Gerald's ear-piercing laughter rang out again. "I really like your strengths. Firm, persistent, and never discouraged. If you really kneel and beg for mercy, I'll find it very boring." Gerald remained motionless. Hazel didn't know how many thoughts ran through her mind, but she couldn't draw her longbow. Probing was a very extravagant thing. If Gerald charged at her with all his strength, she could at most shoot 2 arrows before Gerald reached her side. The few dark elves beside Hazel slowly retreated. They drew the bowstrings in their hands and pointed the arrows at Gerald from afar. They looked like startled hedgehogs. "You don't have to be so nervous. Relax, Hazel. You're a true warrior. In order to express my respect, I will let you die in happiness. It will be true happiness. Trust me." Gerald smiled even more happily when he saw Hazel and the others looking as if they were facing a formidable enemy. "Relax, Hazel. You're a real warrior." Hazel's hands, which were as steady as a rock, started to tremble slightly. Falling into Gerald's hands would be a fate worse than death. At that time, even death would become an extravagant wish. Suddenly, Gerald began to move. He held his war spear upside down and walked forward step by step. Hazel and the others simultaneously retreated. This was the insurmountable gap between the strong and the weak. Before Gerald appeared, the few dark elves had easily slaughtered those warriors. After Gerald appeared, he suppressed Hazel's attack with just his spear and brought great pressure to Hazel. The few dark elves retreated again and again. From the end of the long street, a large number of warriors suddenly appeared. Not only Hazel, But even Han Jin and the others felt a chill in their hearts. It was too late to turn around and run now. Gerald's gaze had already swept over them a few times, especially Han Jin and Morrison's. They felt as if they had been penetrated by something. Clearly, that Gerald had already recognized their identities. Hazel, this shouldn't be. What's wrong? You don't even have the courage to shoot an arrow? Gerald smiled. He liked the feeling of victory, so he didn't mind saying a few more words. Aren't those little fellows over there your friends? Come, let's go together. Gerald's guards also followed and coldly looked at the enemies opposite them. They had followed Gerald through fire and water for many years, so they didn't care about such a small battle. Hazel took a deep breath, but she couldn't shoot the arrow in her hand. She could see the frightened expressions of her companions from the corner of her eyes. There was no doubt that as long as she shot the arrow in her hand, it would mean blowing the horn to attack. What was different from usual was that this time, it was the horn of death. Under the siege of so many people, all they needed to do was charge forward, and they would be torn to pieces in an instant. They had experienced many battles, and everyone's hands could be said to be stained with blood. This kind of ending shouldn't be too bad. Hazel suddenly smiled. Even if they were going to die, they had to die with dignity. Since the ending was already decided, why not make the process more exciting? Just as Hazel was about to shoot the arrow that would end up in a life and death struggle, the situation suddenly changed. Two tall wooden golems appeared on the roof out of thin air. They opened their arms and rushed towards the row of archers. The archers were caught off guard and were pushed into a ball by the wooden golems. Finally, they fell down the slanted roof to the ground. Seeing Han Jin help, Hazel couldn't help but feel refreshed. She drew her longbow and aimed at Gerald. A few arrows pierced through the air, aiming at Gerald's vital points at a speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. Gerald's figure suddenly slid to the side. His speed was so fast that he left behind afterimages. The arrows shot by the Dark Elves passed through the afterimages and shot down two of Gerald's guards. Puppeteer? Interesting. Gerald didn't care about the lives of his subordinates. He held the knight's shield in front of him and rushed towards Hazel again. Get lost. Morrison's roared and rushed towards Gerald. He had already released all of his do chi and swung his sword at the knight's shield. A loud bang sounded. In a head-on collision, Morrison's was the one who rolled back. His body kept tumbling in the air and flew more than 20 meters away. He almost crashed into Sassu and fell heavily to the ground, blood seeping out from the corner of his mouth. A 7th-grade fighter was only fit to be a little lamb in front of Gerald. Gerald, on the other hand, was a true tiger. Hazel and the others drew their bows again. At the same time, Leger suddenly appeared beside Gerald and stuck close to Gerald. The dagger in his hand pierced forward and pierced into Gerald's ribs. Gerald roared and used the handle of his spear to hit Leger. Leger's figure was extremely agile. He rolled on the ground and avoided Gerald's attack. Although he was in a sorry state, at least he wasn't injured. The arrow shot by the Dark Elves also arrived. Gerald used his spear to deflect an arrow aimed at his throat and used the knight's shield to protect his chest. However, there were still two arrows that he couldn't block. One hit his shoulder and the other hit his calf. Berserk! Morrison shouted. Seeing the blood at the corner of Morrison's mouth, Han Jin hesitated for a moment. However, he still released the spirit possession spell. Morrison's let out a carefree roar. Even with Han Jin's physique, he could still display powerful combat strength after being affected by the spirit possession spell, let alone Morrison's. Every time he swung his great sword, it whistled through the air. In the next moment, Morrison's rushed in front of Gerald and slashed down with his greatsword. Morrison's greatsword collided with Gerald's spear. However, this time, Morrison's only took a step back. Then, he roared and swung his greatsword at Gerald's left waist. Seeing that Morrison's could actually hold Gerald in a stalemate, Hazel was immediately energized. He frantically pulled the bowstring in his hand. The Dark Elves and Sunir launched their attacks together. One arrow after another miraculously avoided Morrison's and accurately hit Gerald. In just a short period of time, more than 10 shaky arrows had landed on Gerald's body. However, because Gerald's heavy armor was too tough, the arrows didn't cause any serious damage to Gerald. Sasu had finished chanting his spell. A blazing wall of fire appeared behind Gerald, blocking the guards outside. He then cast a quicksand spell inside the wall of fire. Even if the guards could charge through the wall of fire, they would be swallowed up by the quicksand. Suddenly, a ball of dazzling light burst out. Moxink retreated a dozen steps before he could stabilize himself with a harsh sound of collision. Gerald's aura suddenly changed. He was arrogant before, but now, he was like a dark boulder. Although he was silent, he gave off a suffocating pressure. Hazel, why didn't you use Touch of Darkness? Gerald waved his hand. His movements were extremely fast. The knight's shield on his arm let out a dull sound. Then, a figure appeared out of thin air. He staggered a few steps and fell to the ground. It was Leger. With Leger's strength, he should have been able to avoid this kind of attack. However, he definitely didn't expect that Gerald would discover him and counterattack the moment he was about to make a move. Hazel felt a bitter taste in her mouth. She finally understood why Gerald was at a disadvantage just now. No more Touch of Darkness? Hazel, you really wasted my feelings. Gerald raised his war spear. Although his face couldn't be seen, everyone felt as if they were looking at a devil with a sinister smile. They felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 100. Gerald slowly walked forward. As he approached, the invisible pressure became heavier and heavier. The others couldn't help but step back. Only Hanjin remained motionless. He quietly looked at the long sword in his hand. There were countless strange runes flashing on the blade. Do I have to start all over again? Hanjin sighed. He didn't have any other choice. At this moment, the mage tower in the middle of the city suddenly shot out a dazzling light. Waves of sharp cries rang out at the same time, covering the entire city. Enemy attack alarm? Everyone was dumbstruck. Even Gerald turned around and looked in the direction of the city gate. On the horizon, groups of black dots were flying towards the west side of the city at an extremely fast speed. They were the Vampire Guard. In this era of cold weapons, they were like an airborne force that appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Tall city walls, powerful magic crystal cannons, and many magical towers and arrow towers were nothing to them. They weren't effective at all. Gerald suddenly turned around and looked at Hazel with a bewildered gaze. He never thought that Hazel had the qualifications to mobilize the Vampire Guard. However, when he saw the astonishment in Hazel's eyes, he became even more confused. Without the cover of cannon fodder, he only relied on the Vampire Guard to attack the west side of the city. When did Zagun become so crazy? Could it be that Ghost King Caroline and Betty had lost Zagun's favor? In the blink of an eye, groups of vampires landed. The magic crystal cannons were overturned by the vampires before they could be loaded. The mage towers and arrow towers on the inner side of the city wall had just launched a few attacks when the vampires had already climbed all over the towers. There were also many vampires that landed in the city. The first thing they did after folding their wings was to kill. It didn't matter if the person standing in front of them was a man or a woman, an old person or a child, or even a warrior with a certain amount of fighting power. A huge bat-like monster flew over and fell to the ground. Then, it turned into an abnormally tall vampire who was missing an arm. Obviously, the loss of an arm caused a lot of inconvenience in his flight. His gaze locked on Hanjin and Morrison's. He suddenly roared, "Get out of my way!" Then, he strode towards Hanjin. A few of Gerald's guards were blocking his way. Every time the vampire waved his claws, a guard would be cut into several pieces. No one could stop him for even a moment. Gerald's back. Gerald turned around. His walking speed wasn't fast, and his heavy armor was even more cumbersome. However, his true speed left everyone dumbfounded. A spark lit up on Gerald's war spear. In the next moment, the tip of the spear was already pointing at the vampire's chest. The distance of 7 or 8 meters was like nothing to Gerald. No one saw clearly how he crossed the space. Even the vampire didn't see clearly. He only had time to grab the spear shaft. Unfortunately, he was still too weak to stop the spear, just like how the guards couldn't stop his footsteps. The tall vampire had already recognized the person, but he had never dreamt that this killer would appear in the West City. Jeller. Duh. Gerald snorted coldly, threw the body hanging on the spear shaft far away, and then strode towards the city gate. The vampire guard was Zagun's most trusted troop, and Gerald was Dismart's confidant. He had dealt with the vampire guard too many times. He was very clear that if the vampire guard occupied the West City, it would become a city of death. From a public point of view, if the vampire guard succeeded, it would bring a devastating blow to the morale of the other cities of the Bite Man. If Zagund adopted a conciliatory policy, or divided them, could they still unite to fight against the Black Raven City? The Holy Crown City would face a situation that was worse than it already was. From a private point of view, there was a blood feud between him and the vampire guard. Gerald's biggest wish was to catch Caroline and Betty and cut them into countless pieces of minced meat, just like what happened to his parents. Compared to this, the personal feud between him and Hazel was nothing. Moreover, judging from Hazel's expression, she should have nothing to do with the vampire guard's attack, and was just acting alone. What's more, as a general who had experienced hundreds of battles, he was very clear about what the soldiers needed. The vampire guard's attack was too sudden. Nearly 300 meters of the city wall, as well as the magic towers and arrow towers inside the city wall, were all occupied by the vampire guard. The soldiers were running helplessly and shouting. Now they needed an indestructible example. Kill! Gerald let out a roar. He had exerted all his strength. His majestic fighting spirit had all turned into flowing flames, like fire dragons flying around him. All the vampires who approached him were like miserable moths, and all of them were burned into ashes. However, the most terrible thing about the vampire guard was their brutality. The stronger the enemy was, the crazier they would be. Seeing Gerald rushing into their formation with his spear, as if he was breaking into a no-man's land, those vampires unexpectedly rushed towards Gerald at the same time. Kill! Gerald's spear became more and more aggressive, and the dragon flame fighting technique in his hand played its full power. The vampires were not killed one by one, but turned into ashes one by one. Although more vampires rushed forward fearlessly, no one could stop Gerald for even half a second. His fighting spirit, like a rainbow across the sky, was invincible. Everyone, including Gerald's comrades and Gerald's enemies, were dazzled by this scene. Hazel wanted to assassinate Gerald, not only to destroy Dismark's strategic plan, but also to avenge his sister. Sunir was very disgusted with Gerald, because he was incomparably cruel, had killed countless people, and liked to use extremely vicious methods to torture and kill prisoners of war. However, at this moment, Gerald's weakness was covered by another halo. Who would dare to challenge an army with the strength of a single person? Who would dare to walk forward alone in the face of a tide of enemies? Although he had a purpose to protect this city, he had protected it, and the latter was the main point. It was fine to say that he was a murderer who sexually abused female prisoners or a heinous butcher, but now he was just a fierce and fearless general, holding up the door of hope for the West City with his burning fighting spirit. Kill! Seeing Gerald's incomparably valiant aura, the panicked warriors quickly calmed down and started an organized resistance. Kill! The warriors who were responsible for surrounding the Dark Elves shouted and rushed forward. Almost no one looked at Hazel, because the truth was right there. A few Dark Elves who were causing trouble were just a small problem, but the large-scale attack of the vampires was a disaster that could destroy the city. It was easy to distinguish which was more important and which was more important. Kill! Gerald's figure exploded, and he leaped onto the high city wall like a meteor. The vampires that swarmed forward immediately surrounded him tightly, but in the next moment, an indescribable ball of fire rose into the sky, and dozens of vampires were set on fire as they flew out and screamed. Morrison's felt his blood boiling. He roared and was about to rush forward with his giant sword when Han Jin grabbed him quickly. Only then did Morrison's come to his senses and smile awkwardly. Han Jin hurried to Legé's side and helped Legé up. He then cast a spirit refreshment spell. Legé's chest was heaving up and down violently. Although Gerald's shield bash did not use his full strength, it still caused considerable damage to him. Fortunately, the knight's shield hit his chest. If it had hit his face, he would have been disfigured. I didn't expect Gerald to be so strong, Sasu said softly. He won't be able to hold on for long. Sunir sighed. Soon, his Do Chi will be used up. Han Jin's heart skipped a beat. He casually drew a talisman and waved his hand. Go! The talisman turned into a white light and shot towards Gerald. Gerald's body stiffened, and he suddenly turned around to look at Han Jin. Even though they were so far apart, Han Jin could still feel Gerald's gaze scraping his face. What did you do? Berserk. I hope it will be of some use to him. Hazel stared blankly at Gerald's figure. She loosened and tightened her grip on the bow. Before she could make a decision, Sunir had already sensed her intentions. She coldly said, Hazel, go away. Some things were always so funny. Just a moment ago, they were allies, but now they were enemies. This had nothing to do with character. It was because they were in different camps. Hazel smiled. If we defeat the vampires, do you think Gerald will let you go? Don't be silly. I'd rather die under Gerald's gun than die in the hands of vampires. Sunir suddenly raised her bow. Go away. I don't want to kill you. The dark elves on the other side hurriedly raised their bows and aimed at Sunir. Morrison's held his greatsword and walked to the front. Sasu hurriedly cast a magic shield on himself and hid behind everyone. The atmosphere became tense. This strange turn of events stunned the dozen or so guards who stayed behind to watch. Hazel stretched out her hand and gestured for the dark elves to put down their bows. Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble. I just want to leave this place. At this moment, a sharp scream was heard. Gerald, it's you. The faces of the two opposing elves changed at the same time. In the center of the city, there was the sound of hurried hooves. Groups of fully armed warriors were rushing over. The reinforcements from the west side of the city had finally arrived. There were dozens of figures flying in the air. They should be the magicians under the command of the city lord, Winston. The two elves looked at each other and retreated. Now was the best time to escape the west side of the city. God knows what would happen if they stayed any longer. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 101. When the battle was at its fiercest, a group of people secretly moved forward along the east side of the city wall. Almost all the troops in the city were gathered together, and there was no one on the city wall nearby. Only a few sentinels were talking in low voices in the watchtower. If the vampires could attack from here, they should be able to cause a lot of trouble in the west side of the city. However, their abilities were limited. White Man had always maintained its independence. In this principality dominated by human beings, people were always full of hatred for dark creatures, such as vampires. Therefore, they could unite against a common enemy. In other words, the vampires did not have the geographical advantage. This was destined to be a difficult and costly surprise attack. The chatter of the sentinels suddenly stopped. A moment later, Legé stuck his head out and made a hand gesture to everyone. Han Jin and the rest hurriedly ran up the city wall and threw down a rope. Morrison's was the first to be put down, followed by Sasu. When the two people below were sure that there was no problem, Chi Li, Stillberg, and the rest of the people who could not fight were put down. Han Jin and the rest worked hard on the city wall for a long time, but no one discovered them. In the two magic towers not far away, there were magicians guarding them. As long as they stuck their heads out and looked down, Han Jin and the rest would be exposed. However, at this time, the magicians were more concerned about the sky and the black dots that were flying rapidly. Even if they did, they might not have the energy to care about them. Han Jin was the last one to slide down the rope. Then, everyone ran along the city wall for a while. Han Jin released a black tortoise holy spell, and everyone climbed onto the turtle's back. Under the control of Han Jin, the giant turtle rushed straight into the wilderness. Curses came from behind them, but no one attacked them. The magicians hiding in the tower must have thought that they were a group of cowardly mercenaries who had abandoned the battle. They mocked and scolded them contemptuously and then let them go. When they came to West City, everyone liked the feeling of sitting on the back of a turtle. But now, they were all silent and speechless. At the critical moment, Gerald's explosive strength had left them with too much shock. Morrison's used a piece of animal skin to wipe the blade of his sword. He flipped it around and wiped it. His movements were forceful, as if he was venting something. Leger leaned against the tortoise's neck, his eyes looking at the night sky like a bard. Sunir placed her longbow on her legs, and from time to time, she would use her hands to flick the bowstring, creating a crisp echo. If anyone could see through the minds of others, they would realize that Morrison's and the others were all thinking about the same thing, to become a true powerhouse. They had never wanted something as badly as they did now. In order to avoid attracting attention, Hanjin and the others changed their daily routine. They traveled at night during the day and hurried to the 9th town that Leger had mentioned. On this day, they came to a nameless spring. The city was filled with the bleakness of the end of winter, but here, there was a strong sense of spring. On both sides of the spring, there was a layer of fresh green grass and all kinds of budding wildflowers. The rising sun sprinkled countless golden scales on the spring. However, because of the slope, the spring flowed down very quickly, and the water was overflowing with bubbles. Everyone sat on both sides of the spring, chatting and laughing softly. Michel and Stillbird were preparing dinner for everyone. Although the sun had just risen for them, now was the time for dinner. Do you think those vampires can take down West City? Sassu asked. He had been holding this question in his heart for a few days. It's very difficult, Sunir said. If Gerald and Mayor Winston work together, Caroline won't be able to take advantage of them, unless Betty comes to help her. However, I heard that Betty and Caroline have a deep conflict, so I don't think that will happen. Only leading the Vampire Guard to attack West City, and no other army to cooperate and support, Caroline's decision is too crazy, Leger said. I'm sure that the vampires will suffer a lot of casualties. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's talk about something happy. Hanjin looked at Sylvia and Chi Li on the opposite side of the spring. The two of them were now in a mess, splashing water at each other. However, Chi Li's stamina was not as good as Sylvia's, so she was obviously at a disadvantage. Stop fooling around. The weather is still very cold. What if he gets sick? Sunir shouted. Sylvia, who had taken advantage of them, smiled and stopped. However, Chi Li was not satisfied and splashed water at them. Sylvia suddenly screamed and covered her forehead with her hand. She said angrily, Chi Li, why did you hit me with a stone? I didn't, Chi Li hurriedly explained. Suddenly, she remembered that when she put her hand into the spring water, she felt a kind of heavy feeling. Her heart immediately became weak. She stood up and looked around. Finally, she found a suspicious object in the grass. Look, it's this thing. Sylvia bent down and picked up the object. It was half a jade pendant. The jade pendant was full of cracks. It was not clear if it was born like this or if it was broken when Sylvia fell on her head. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't know there was such a thing in the water, Chi Li said. Sylvia was studying the jade pendant in her hand when little Joseph suddenly screamed. He was washing his hands in the water, but he found a ring. A space ring. Sassu exclaimed. Little Joseph was shocked. He held the ring in his hand, not knowing what to do. Hanjin stood up and looked at Sunir. He said slowly, the rest of you stay here. Sunir, Sassu, and I will go upstream to take a look. The further upstream they went, the denser the forest became. After walking for about a few hundred meters, Hanjin and Sunir saw 2 dead people lying on the ground. A swarm of bean flies was circling their bodies, making buzzing sounds. Sunir's expression changed. She had seen many dead people, so this was nothing. The problem was that one of the bodies was lying in the water, and she had just drunk a few mouthfuls of spring water. For a moment, Sunir felt her stomach churn. She almost vomited. Sasu chanted an incantation in a low voice. He raised his hand and shot out a large fireball. The fireball passed through the swarm of bean flies, turning thousands of them into ashes. However, there were still some that survived and continued to circle the bodies. Sasu simply released a wave of fire, and the forest finally quieted down. "What's going on?" Morrison's rushed over. When he saw Sasu continuously releasing spells, he knew that something must have gone wrong. When he saw the two bodies, his expression became even worse than Sunir's. He was one of the people who drank the water. Who the F***ck is so immoral? You killed people, but you should have buried them. You just threw them into the water and done with it? Trash, dog ***T. Morrison's cursed. Hanjin carefully examined the two bodies. Both of them were naked and had been stripped naked. Judging from the condition of their bodies, coupled with the current climate and temperature, they had been dead for at least 3 days. The person lying in the water had died very quickly. His neck had been severed by a sword, and there were no other wounds. His head must have been washed away by the water. The person lying on the shore was covered with wounds of various sizes. His body was curled up into a ball, and he seemed to be in great pain. It was very likely that he had been tortured to the point where he could not die. Hanjin used his foot to pick him up. There were many wounds on his face, but there were no fatal wounds. In other words, Hanjin could not find the cause of death. Morrison's cursing attracted everyone's attention. When they saw the scene, their expressions changed, especially those who drank and played in the water. Chi Li's face was pale, and her hands were desperately rubbing her body. If there were no men around, she would have torn off her clothes and thrown them far away. "Raphael, I think this guy looks familiar," Sasu said slowly. "Oh." Hanjin could not help but take a closer look at the corpse. It did look familiar, but neither he nor Sasu could remember where they had seen it. Sunir resisted the urge to vomit and walked over to observe the corpse. Although it had been dead for a few days, she could still recognize the face. Sunir had a flash of inspiration and said, "Do you remember? There was a magician in the Mercenary Association of Isolated Cliff City who came to invite Morrisons to join them. That high-level sage, Cabri? How did he become like this?" Sasu was stunned for a moment, and then yelled, "Morrisons, come over and take a look. Is this guy Cabri?" Morrisons, who had been cursing loudly, shut his mouth and strode over. As he walked, he asked, "Which Cabri?" "The magician who tried to recruit you in Isolated Cliff City." Morrisons observed carefully for a moment. "It looks like him, but it can't be. That guy is an 8th grade professional. How could he be killed like a dog? So what if he's an 8th grade professional?" Leger sneered. "If he met Gerald, he would be a dog." Although Leger was a real 8th grade professional, Gerald's shield attack had seriously hurt his self-esteem, and he had not recovered yet. Therefore, whenever he saw someone taking an 8th grade professional seriously, he would stand out and mock them, including himself. Fortunately, I was strong-willed enough to not follow this guy. Otherwise, Morrisons quickly found something to encourage himself and looked around. "I would be lying here too. Let's go." Before she finished her words, Keely couldn't bear it anymore and vomited out. "Sunir, take them upstream and find a clean place to wash." This was exactly what Sunir wanted. She nodded and led Chi Li, Sylvia, and the others upstream. Morrisons hurriedly said, "I'll go too. Wait for me." After that, he followed behind Sylvia. "Anyway, I've met this guy once," Hanjin said softly. "Let's bury them." Leger seemed to have thought of something. After a long pause, he suddenly said, "Raphael, I want to go back to my hometown." "Hometown?" "Yes, it's not far from here." Leger lowered his head. "My father is buried there. I haven't been back for a few years. Yesterday afternoon, due to chest tightness, I couldn't take it anymore, so I went to Shenyang with my family. The suffocating feeling was too scary. I didn't have the energy to plan for tonight's update. Sorry." Some of the people in the group knew that I had been suffering from laryngitis for a long time now. It would recur after recuperating. The doctor told me that I couldn't touch cigarettes, alcohol, or anything spicy. Everything else was fine, but not smoking was killing me, especially when I was writing my story. Reality tells me that if I have cigarettes, I can at least write 1,000 words per hour. If I don't, I can only sit there and stare. In order not to affect my writing, I've tried my best to control myself. I can't quit. The Shenyang doctor's tone was much better than Teeling's. He directly asked me if I wanted to smoke or die. He also told me that laryngitis has gone from acute to chronic. This kind of disease can't be cured. I was so scared that I broke out in cold sweat. I don't know anything about this. I just came back this morning. I'll go talk to the doctor's friend tonight. If there's no other way, I'll have to quit. The only thing I'm relieved about is that I did a full body checkup in Shenyang. Everything else is normal, especially my lungs. The part I'm most afraid of is fine. It seems that my practice of Aquarius Chi wasn't in vain. Chapter 102. Han Jin was meditating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he heard a scream that seemed to be suppressed by something. He immediately opened his eyes and looked around. Everyone was resting. Sunir, who was in charge of keeping watch, was hiding in the leaves. From where he was, he could see two legs swinging back and forth. It seemed that nothing had happened. Han Jin waited for a moment. Just as he was about to fall down, the scream rang out again. He stood up and walked towards the source of the sound. Because Morrison's and Sylvia had rolled together when they were sleeping, everyone had to separate their sleeping areas. At the very least, they had to separate the men from the women to avoid similar situations. Fortunately, it was Morrison's and Sylvia. They had known each other for many years, and their relationship was very ambiguous. Therefore, they did not treat it as a big deal. If it was someone else, how would they deal with it? Chi Li and Sylvia were resting in their temporary tent. Sylvia was sleeping soundly, while Chi Li seemed to be having a nightmare. Her eyelids were trembling rapidly, and her mouth was slightly open. She let out a long series of low but clear screams, like a siren singing. Han Jin saw that Chi Li's forehead was covered with sweat. He knew that Chi Li was in a daze and could not wake up on her own. He reached out his hand and gently patted Chi Li's cheek. The screams stopped abruptly, but Chi Li's mouth was still open. It was a strange scene. Han Jin turned around and was about to leave when Chi Li screamed again. It seemed that she was disgusted by the two corpses. Han Jin knew very well that he did not drink the spring water. If he did, he would definitely be traumatized. Chi Li, wake up, Han Jin said as he patted Chi Li's forehead a few times. Chi Li suddenly jumped up and hugged Han Jin. Han Jin was so scared that he trembled and clenched his fists. He almost hit Chi Li. It didn't mean that Han Jin had been guarding against Miss Keeley all the time. People's instinctive reaction when they were frightened was often inseparable from their personality. Some people would scream or run away in fear, while some would attack at the same time when they were frightened. Han Jin belonged to the latter. It's me. Don't be nervous. Relax, Han Jin said in a low voice. The shade made of branches was pushed aside. Sunir looked inside curiously. On the other side, Silner also opened her eyes and asked in a daze, "What's wrong?" "It's nothing." Chi Li had a nightmare. Han Jin was very embarrassed. Strictly speaking, other people's nightmares had nothing to do with him. Also, because Chi Li was sleeping, she was not wearing much. Now that she was hugging him tightly, he could even feel her heart beating, not to mention other feelings. Oh! Sylvia turned over and fell asleep again. Chi Li had just woken up. She pushed Han Jin away and lay down on the straw mattress. Sunir asked with concern, "Chi Li, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I just had a nightmare. Thank you," Chi Li replied vaguely. Han Jin shrugged and went outside. Sunir looked at Han Jin's face seriously and suddenly said, "Raphael, have you touched a lot of women?" "No." Han Jin was stunned. "No." Sunir walked over and looked at Han Jin from head to toe. She smiled and said, "If you really didn't, do you know what would happen?" "What would happen?" "Your face would be red, your mouth would be dry, and you wouldn't dare to look at other people. Just like Chi Li now." Sunir frowned and said, "You don't look like a young man." "Nonsense. She's a woman and I'm a man. How can we compare?" Han Jin also realized that he was too calm, so he had to find other excuses. If he was really a virgin, after hugging Chi Li just now, there would definitely be some problems. It would be impossible for him to be so calm. Then tell me, have you touched a woman before? Sunir omitted the word a lot this time. Yes, I have. I even touched you. What's there to ask? Han Jin was stunned. You? I'm talking about that kind of. Sunir blushed. Then what are you talking about? Han Jin humbly asked. Sunir was finally defeated by Han Jin's shameless question. She answered vaguely and walked away. After a few leaps, she returned to the tree. When it came to women, Han Jin was speechless. In his opinion, there were only two kinds of women. One was the kind that he had to take responsibility for, and the other was the kind that he didn't have to take responsibility for. He had always been fond of the latter. Only a young man who didn't know what responsibility was would be willing to take responsibility for all the beautiful women in the world. He wanted to spread his seed to the ends of the earth. Those who had experienced it would naturally understand that responsibility was heavy enough. Of course, Han Jin understood this. That was why he wasn't very interested in Chi Li or Sunir, even though they were very beautiful. Morrison's was the most deceptive. When they were in isolated Cliff City, he first used all kinds of seductive words to describe the style of the bar girls to Han Jin, making him curious about the professional players in this world. Then, he promised to take Han Jin to broaden his horizons. However, Morrison's was closely watched by Sylvia. Morrison's didn't even drink much, let alone broaden his horizons. Sigh. Han Jin sighed softly. He lay on his back on the straw mattress and stared at the blue sky. He suddenly felt that he couldn't fall asleep. When the sky turned dark, everyone opened their eyes one after another as Michelle shouted for them to wake up. They couldn't reverse their sleep schedule. They slept from sunrise to sunset. In fact, they slept for quite a long time, but they just couldn't get enough sleep. The bonfire was lit, and everyone sat around it. Han Jin lazily took out a piece of treefolk wood and began to carve. Making the black tortoise holy spell had become a daily task. It was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Everyone was used to traveling on the back of a turtle. If they were asked to walk on their own feet, they would definitely go on strike. Chili yawned as she came out from the shade. When she saw Han Jin, she blushed for no reason and then looked away. Michelle, why is it still bread? Can't we change it? Morrison's yelled. We don't have anything else, Michelle said awkwardly. Only bread. Then can't we bring something else? Where are you going to put it? Han Jin said unhappily. Into my and Sunir's space ring? Where are you going to carry it? Right, the space ring. Morrison's looked at Sesu. How about that space ring? Can you open it up? No, it's already useless. Sasu shook his head. What if we find an alchemist to work with? Can it be repaired? Morrison's was a bit reluctant. I don't know, but we should at least try. Right, Morrison's. Let me take a look at that jade pendant, Han Jin said. Sylvia handed the jade pendant to Morrison's, and Morrison's handed it to Han Jin. Han Jin took it and examined it carefully. The jade pendant looked very simple and was made of excellent material. However, it didn't look like an ornament. Only the top half of the jade pendant was left, so it was hard to tell what it was used for. Haven't you seen a jade pendant like this before? Han Jin asked. To be honest, the two people who died had nothing to do with them. They tried their best to find out what happened, but it was only because of Han Jin's occupational disease. Let me take a look. For some reason, Chi Li, who had been quietly avoiding Han Jin, was the first to reach out her hand. Han Jin leaned forward and handed the jade pendant to Chi Li. Soon, the jade pendant was turned around in everyone's hands, but no one could tell anything about it. Raphael, why are you so interested in Cabri? Sasu asked. I think we've only met him once. I couldn't sleep during the day, so I walked around the forest and found many traces of battle. They fought all the way there. Han Jin pointed at the bottom of the spring. Then Cabri was subdued, and his companions were killed. After that, Cabri was tortured and interrogated for a long time. In the end, he died mysteriously. I can't find out the reason for his death. Don't you think he's hiding a big secret? Come, give me 2 more pieces. Michelle began to give out the bread. Morrison's, who hated bread, actually reached out and snatched a few pieces. No one was interested in Han Jin's analysis, but they couldn't blame them. Hanjin didn't say much and didn't tempt them. If he said that Cabri knew of a dragon's treasure, these people would let Hanjin know what true passion was. Hanjin was somewhat embarrassed. Sunir said slowly, Cabri is a high-level sage. If his enemy could capture him and take his life in a way that we don't know, then his enemy can do the same to any one of us. We already have a lot of trouble. Is there a need to provoke another group of enemies? Well, you have a point. Hanjin smiled and put the jade pendant into his spatial ring. Although he agreed with Sunir, he still couldn't bear to throw away the only clue. Leger, what fun things do you have in your home? Sylvia asked. It depends on what you want to do. Leger thought for a moment. Have you seen a waterfall? What I want is something strange. There are only 100 or so villagers in my hometown. Do you think there will be many strange things? Leger smiled bitterly. I heard that when Legion of Conrad was young, he met a pitiful old man. Legion of Conrad was kind and ran back home to find some food for the old man. In the end, he became the old man's student. Is this legend true? Sasu asked. It's true. I met him when I was young. Leger said softly. My grandparents were very ordinary farmers. How could they have raised a 10th order powerhouse? Wow. The atmosphere of the discussion became lively. This kind of dramatic story was easy to attract people's attention. You met him when you were young? What happened after that? Sasu asked. He's been missing for many years. Leja sighed. He knew very well that his father had learned all his skills from that old man. If that old man was still alive and could give his father some pointers from time to time, his father would not have died of depression in the prime of his life. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 103. According to Leger, the village where his father was born didn't have a proper name. After his father became the commander of the Legion, he named the village Green Garden. As the name implied, it was a world full of green. His father also tried his best to get a tax-free permit for the villagers, turning the village into a comfortable home. In the early morning, they finally arrived at Green Garden. Leger looked at the scenery in front of him quietly, his chest heaving up and down. Apparently, he was deeply moved. In fact, Green Garden was not an isolated village. The key was that the commander of the Legion of Conrad was so powerful that the municipal officials didn't dare to offend him. Under the protection of Conrad, the villagers of Green Garden had enjoyed a comfortable life for more than 10 years. Farmers were more grateful than nobles and were more easily moved. When Conrad was buried, all the villagers came and cried in front of his tombstone. It was not an act. Their sadness was no less than that of Leger. Some of them even cried in front of Conrad's tombstone for several days, which was something that even Leger couldn't do. Talking about the past, Leger's eyes turned red. When he saw the villagers, he understood his father's intention. Normally, Knight of Conrad had spent a lot of energy on Riptide and won a lot of love. Therefore, he should be buried near the headquarters of Riptide in Bite City, which would sound better. However, Leja vaguely understood that his father did not want that kind of life. He had only become a general because life had forced him to that position. Perhaps when his father was busy with the matters of the division, he always wished to return to that small mountain village to be accompanied by the blue sky and white clouds. Otherwise, why didn't his father blame him when he was spurned by his mother's whole family? On the contrary, his father always indulged him. It was because his father was too tired that he didn't want his son to follow the same path. Perhaps it was because he was homesick, or perhaps there was too much guilt in his heart, but Leger's emotions were close to morbid. He would always tell the story of his father tirelessly. Hanjin and the others felt very strange. They really did not expect that there would be such a person in the world. Riptide was the Beatman's #1 main army. The army's strength was too strong, so strong that it couldn't be controlled by any one city lord. If this really happened, the other 3 city lords would definitely start a war. This was because the city lord who controlled Riptide would unify the Bite Man sooner or later. No one would be willing to wait for death. Thus, Riptide had always been outside the influence of the other 4 city lords. This was the only way to avoid the danger of a civil war. Of course, controlling such an army would allow one to do many things. For example, obtaining a fief, accumulating wealth, and so on. To the Knight of Conrad, these were just small matters. However, he had never sought personal benefits. After Conrad died of illness, Leger sold his family's property and escorted his father's coffin back to his hometown. He also moved his mother's coffin to be buried with him. This had already used up most of his inheritance. In other words, the weapons and soft armor that Leger had now were all earned by himself. They had nothing to do with Conrad. An upright leader would of course be respected, but a leader who was upright to the point of stupidity would make people sigh. The giant tortoise broke into the green garden and ran on a hillside facing the sun. Below it was the village where the villagers lived. Han Jin suddenly felt that something was wrong. Why was there no smoke? At that moment, Leger shouted, "Wait, wait." Han Jin hurriedly controlled the giant tortoise to stop. Leger jumped down from the giant tortoise and followed a small path into the forest. Han Jin and the others knew that they had arrived. Out of courtesy, Han Jin asked the giant tortoise to stop outside and followed Sunir, Morrison's, and the others into the forest. There was no graveyard as they had imagined. There was only a large pit in front of them. Yellowish-brown water was seeping out of the bottom of the pit, and there were broken bricks everywhere. The scene was a mess. Leger was standing at the edge of the pit in a daze. No one knew what he was thinking. "What's going on?" Morrison's shouted in surprise. "Who did this? Who did this?" Leger suddenly roared. His eyes turned blood red, and the veins on his forehead and neck bulged. Especially when he roared, the veins on his neck bulged as high as a finger. He looked like he was about to bite someone. Seeing Leger close to madness, Han Jin and the others were stunned. They didn't know how to comfort him. Stillberg's scream came from outside the forest. "Young master, there's an enemy. There's an enemy. They're coming for us." Han Jin and the others hurriedly rushed outside. They saw a group of people surrounding the giant tortoise. They were holding forks, sticks, and other objects and were hitting the giant tortoise. Some of them were even trying to climb onto the giant tortoise. Sylvia and the two mercenaries were desperately defending. Because the attackers were mostly old men and women, and they were also villagers of the Green Garden, they couldn't hit them too hard. They could only push them down gently. However, the attackers didn't care. Once they got on the tortoise's back, they would be greeted with sticks and forks. "You heartless people, give us back our man. Bastards, bastards, you've already taken our master away. What are you doing here? Kill them. Let's do it. Avenge our master. Let's do it." Old, hoarse, sharp, and children's cries mixed together. Sylvia was so anxious that she was sweating profusely. The people below seemed to have gone crazy. Just now, when she reached out to push an old man, he opened his mouth and bit her wrist. She flung the old man aside in pain. Then she saw that there were a few teeth hanging on her wrist. The old man opened his bloody mouth and continued to pounce on her. This kind of strong fighting spirit gave Sylvia a headache. She couldn't fight back, and she couldn't pull out her sword to attack. If this continued, she would lose the battle sooner or later. Sylvia anxiously saw Han Jin and hurriedly shouted, "Help! Come and save us!" The women turned around and saw Han Jin and the others. Before they could do anything, Leger rushed out of the forest like a mad tiger and roared, "Who is it? Who destroyed my father's graveyard?" "Young Master Leger?" An old man saw Leger and showed a surprised and happy expression. He stumbled over to Leger and said, "Young Master Leger is back. That's great. We're saved." Leger was on the verge of madness. He grabbed the old man's collar and lifted him up in the air. "Is it you? Tell me, is it you?" The old man was held so tightly that his eyes rolled back. His lips kept opening and closing, but he couldn't say a word. With a whoosh, the group of old men and women gathered together. Although Leger looked terrible, at least there was a pillar of support. The villagers didn't care about anything else and surrounded Leger, crying and wailing. Leger finally knew that his father's graveyard was destroyed by the new cavalry commander of Riptide, General Rudolph. His father's coffin was taken away, and his mother's coffin was burned on the spot. At that time, the men in the village rushed out and tried to reason with General Rudolph. In the end, a conflict broke out. About 7 or 8 men were killed, and the rest were taken away. The women wept sorrowfully while pointing at the edge of the forest. There were a few more clumps of yellow soil, and their men were buried under them. This was the idea of the elders in the village. They had received so many favors from Master Conrad, so they should repay him. Since they died to protect Master, they should bury them in the forest. After understanding everything, Leger's face turned pale. He turned and walked toward the forest, but his body shook and he fell to the ground. For Leger, this feeling was very strange. In fact, he was very clear-headed and knew what he should do. First, he had to find his mother's body and bury it. Then, he had to discuss with Han Jin and ask for help to find out where his father was taken. Then, they could go and rob him together. However, his legs refused to listen to him. He wanted to walk, but he couldn't. He wanted to turn around, but he could only turn halfway. Seeing that the ground was getting closer and closer to him, Leger panicked. Suddenly, his vision turned black, and he lost consciousness. Han Jin quickly squeezed through the crowd and put his finger on Leger's wrist. Morrison's also squeezed in. He asked in confusion, "What are you doing? How is Leger?" "He's fine. He's just too agitated." Han Jin let go of his hand. "Then why don't you wake him up? Don't you think he should sleep a little longer?" Han Jin sighed. "Actually, Leger should have expected this," Sunir whispered. "What? If those people dared to do this to him, they obviously didn't care about his father. What can a coffin that can't talk do? Didn't they say? Knight of Conrad was very influential in Riptide. How dare they do this to him? He was very influential when he was alive, but not after death." Sunir smiled bitterly. Everyone was silent. Conrad had done so much for the Legion when he was alive, but he was treated like this after his death. It was truly chilling. After a while, Stillberg came over and shouted, "Master, I know. Knight of Conrad was taken to 9th Town." "How did you know?" "The 2 women over there told me." Stillberg pointed with his finger. "Their men were taken to 9th Town. They secretly went there a few days ago and found that Knight of Conrad's coffin was placed in the square. General Rudolph gave an order that anyone who spat on the coffin would be rewarded with a copper coin and—" "Stop talking," Han Jin shouted. He looked at Leger and found that Leger was still unconscious. He was relieved. If Leger heard this, who knew what would happen to him? "I thought my grades would be very bad after this accident. I was determined to be an ostrich and focus on writing. I didn't expect everyone to support me so much. I'm so touched." Many of my friends also left their experiences in quitting smoking. Actually, quitting should be easy. I quit several times a year, but this time I really went all out. There may still be cigarettes at home, but there is no fire. Even the electric lighter has been taken away, and the door is locked from the inside. No matter if my friends want to find me or I want to find my friends, there is no door. This is the last way to smoke. Of course, there are other ways, such as focusing and so on. There's also a magnifying glass at home. But if I'm forced to that point, quitting smoking will be a failure, so it can be ignored. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 104. There doesn't seem to be many people here today. A soldier looked at the passing crowd and said listlessly, "I guess we won't be able to finish the task. I heard that our brothers didn't finish the task yesterday either." Another soldier sighed. "I didn't expect that Conrad still has such great prestige, even though he has been dead for 2 years." Behind these soldiers, there was a shabby coffin, in which there was a skeleton. Beside the coffin, there was a big board listing all the crimes that Conrad had committed when he was alive, such as abusing soldiers, embezzling military funds, etc. Anyway, there was no evidence since he was dead. Below the board, there were the reward criteria. It also said that Conrad was a cruel and tyrannical hypocrite who had gained fame by deceiving the public. As a general, he was really distressed to see such a sinner being praised. Therefore, he set up a board to expose Conrad's crimes, and promised that whoever spat out a mouthful of blood would be rewarded as much as he wanted, and whoever cursed him would be rewarded as much as he wanted. In fact, everyone knew what kind of person Conrad was. He had held the military power for more than 10 years, and the headquarters of Riptide was located in Bite City, the capital city. Conrad could make himself the Castellan of Bite City, the fifth Castellan and the most powerful one at any time. However, Conrad had never interfered with the political affairs and allowed the management of Bite City to be changed among the Castellans. If such an unambitious, self-restrained knight was a hypocrite, then it would be hard to find a good man in the world. However, Rudolph also had his own difficulties. He had been the commander of Riptide's cavalry for more than a year, but he always felt that his hands and feet were tied, and he was depressed and uncomfortable. Generally speaking, there was no corps commander now, so the commander of cavalry should be the well-deserved supreme leader for the cavalry. However, Conrad's influence was everywhere, and he couldn't do anything. It was said that these were the rules set by Conrad when he was alive. Whenever he violated them, his subordinates would come to advise him. Rudolph couldn't bear it anymore. As the commander of cavalry, he didn't want to live under the shadow of a dead man. Of course, when Conrad had just died, his prestige was still at its peak, and he had to bear it even if he couldn't bear it. However, it was different now. Conrad had been dead for 2 years, and his prestige had been declining. Besides, he had to eliminate the remaining influence of Conrad in a short time and turn all the knight's soldiers into his own private property. Therefore, he thought that he should test the soldiers' bottom line. Didn't accomplish the task? Did they get whipped? The soldier in the front. What do you think? Would General Rudolph let them go? Ha! What should we do? Should we get whipped? Sigh, just grit your teeth, and it will be over. You say. The soldier looked around and said in a low voice, "We can secretly share the money and say that many people came to scold Conrad today. Wouldn't that work?" You're crazy. If we didn't accomplish the task, we would just get whipped a few times. If we dare to lie to General Rudolph, we will be beheaded. But the soldier was stunned for a moment and suddenly smiled. He turned around and walked to the coffin. He pinched his nose and spat into the coffin. Then he walked to the sign and picked up a copper coin. This isn't considered lying, right? No one said that we can't scold Conrad. That's right. The rest of the soldiers reacted. They also knew that the commander hated the former Legion commander, Knight of Conrad. If they participated in the scolding, even if the commander knew that they were lying, he wouldn't punish them. The soldiers were overjoyed. They surrounded the coffin and started to spit. They thought that they had found a good way to get rich, but as time passed, they realized that money wasn't that easy to earn. After spitting a few times, they felt that their mouths were dry. Bastard! One of the soldiers heard a scolding from behind. The voice was trembling, and it was obvious that the person was extremely angry. The soldier quickly turned around and suddenly felt a chill in his stomach. He looked down and saw a dagger stabbed deep into his stomach. You? The soldier reached out and tried to grab the person in front of him. Who are you people? What do you want? The rest of the soldiers were alerted. Die. Morrison's words were very short. Then, the giant sword came down. The soldier pulled out his sword to block, but he was cut in half along with his sword. These two are too violent, aren't they? Han Jean, who was standing on the back of the turtle, smiled bitterly. I hope the information you got is correct. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. Don't worry, Sunier said calmly. The soldiers in the cavalry unit are holding back their anger. It's just that no one is leading them. Yes, they're cursing Rudolph behind his back. Sassa nodded. If there's someone who can gain everyone's recognition, haha, then there'll be a lot of fun to watch. Leger is such a person, Sunier continued. Han Jean and the rest didn't make a move. They didn't need to. Morrison's and Leger were more than enough to deal with a few low-level warriors. At this moment, Leger had already examined the bones in the coffin. He closed the lid and then knelt respectfully in front of the coffin. The streets were in chaos. People were running around and shouting. Soon, a group of fully armed knights heard the commotion and came over. When they saw Leger kneeling there, they froze. Han Jean nervously observed the knights' reactions. He felt uneasy. Sunir said that the hearts of the people could be used. Although Rudolph had cleaned up the low-level officers and replaced them with his own trusted aides, he couldn't replace all the soldiers. He could control the situation now because the soldiers couldn't communicate with each other. They didn't know what the other soldiers were thinking. As long as someone with a high status took the lead to cause trouble, the situation would be reversed. Hanjin didn't have this kind of experience. This was a rebellion. Sunir was interested in this matter because of Wild Willow City. If Leger could control the Beatmen's strongest fighter, Riptide, with their relationship with Leger, they would have a bright future. As for Sasu, that guy must have read too many Legends of the Heroes and thought that a coup d'état was a simple matter. The central figure could solve everything with a wave of his hand. Therefore, Hanjin concentrated on observing the changes in the knight's expressions. As the saying goes, one can see the whole picture from one point. The attitude of the knights towards Leger could determine the outcome of this matter. The knights were stunned for a moment. They jumped off their horses and knelt on one knee. "Young Marshal, tell me, where is Rudolph?" Leger said expressionlessly. "Young Marshal, let's take you there." The knights looked at each other and said in a loud voice, "We can't stand his brutality and stubbornness anymore. Let's go." Leger waved his hand. Sunir looked at Hanjin's expression from behind and smiled. "For a small noble like you who hides in a mountain village, you can't understand how a real knight is loved." Hanjin laughed dryly. He always thought that Sunir's assumption was very difficult to achieve. Although he agreed with Sunir's plan in the end, he still didn't agree with it. He didn't think that such a scene would really happen. As time went by, Hanjin was repeatedly attacked. In the end, he couldn't believe his eyes. Groups of knights heard the news and rushed over from all directions. Some of them knelt down to Leger, while some of them didn't say a word and just followed behind Leger. In less than 2 miles, there were hundreds of soldiers behind Leger. Hanjin suddenly realized that he was the shallow one. He actually described Leger's father as dull and incompetent. It was ridiculous. It was true that Conrad didn't leave any tangible legacy. However, at this moment, with only one figure and one voice, the new order that had already been formed collapsed in an instant. What could be more valuable than this? Leger walked in the front with his bloody dagger in his hand. Morrison's walked beside Leger with a huge sword on his shoulder. Behind them were all knights. The 9th town was a military town. The 1st and 2nd cavalry companies of Riptide were stationed here. Hearing the news, more and more knights rushed over. In the end, they even blocked Hanjin and the others outside. Occasionally, when some officers saw this scene, they cleverly retreated and pretended that they didn't see anything. Occasionally, some soldiers who didn't know Leger jumped out to ask what was going on. However, in the blink of an eye, they were all killed by the knights. The knights knew very well that Rudolph had insulted the remains of Knight of Conrad in this way. The hatred between him and Leger was irreconcilable. Therefore, no matter what they saw, they didn't need to be surprised or think about the future. After all, the young marshal was with them. Their brothers from everywhere would come back, just like when Leger was still alive. In fact, Rudolph was really unlucky. Leger didn't come back earlier or later. Instead, he appeared when the soldiers were most agitated. Even if several commanders of Riptide were in the 9th town, they still wouldn't be able to control the situation, let alone Rudolph himself. In front of them was the barracks. The soldiers guarding the barracks were very nervous when they saw the crowd approaching. However, when they saw that it was Leger, they opened the fence without saying a word. Hanjin controlled the giant turtle to stop outside the barracks. The shape of the giant turtle was too eye-catching. Several knights looked at them impolitely. Leger and Morrison's went in again. He didn't want to cause any unnecessary trouble. "I hope Leger can solve this quickly. We still have to continue our journey." Sunir said softly, "Raphael, are you okay? Leger will never forgive us for the rest of his life if we delay things. How about we tell him the truth now?" "Don't worry." Hanjin smiled. When they were investigating, Sunir and Sasu overheard some soldiers talking. Leger's friend, Lang Ning, was the captain of the 1st Cavalry Regiment in the town. Rudolph wanted to remove Conrad's influence, so the first person he wanted to get rid of was Lang Ning. Therefore, he colluded with some nobles and framed Lang Ning for raping a young lady of a noble family. He announced that Lang Ning was sentenced to death. In order to avoid trouble during the execution, he also imprisoned Lang Ning in the 10th town. The execution time was set for tomorrow at noon. It could only be said that Leger came back at the right time. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 105. Suddenly, there was a burst of battle cries in the barracks. This was a pure mutiny because Leger did not have any military position. No matter how high his position was before, it was not a reason to interfere with the army. Making such a scene was no different from a rebellion. All the officers knew that the situation wasn't good. Some hid in their barracks and didn't dare to come out. Some turned around and stood on Leger's side. As for the officers who liked to bully the soldiers and often insulted Conrad, they ran around the barracks, trying to find a way out. However, the scale of the mutiny was too big. Almost all the soldiers were involved. They couldn't escape at all. If they weren't killed by the soldiers, they were tied up by the soldiers. Cavalry Commander Rudolph had more than 200 personal guards. These personal guards were brought out from his home. They were his private soldiers, so they didn't fear death. However, Rudolph couldn't do that. He used to say that as a legion commander, his combat strength was the most insignificant. His decision-making ability was the key to success or failure. It had to be admitted that Rudolph's words made sense. He also used this to attack Conrad, because Conrad was a 10th Order powerhouse and Rudolph was only a 6th Order knight. However, the situation was reversed. His words had to be reversed. In this chaotic situation, decision-making ability was the most insignificant. One's combat strength was the key to success or failure. If Rudolph had the combat strength of a 10th Order powerhouse like Gerald, he could have rushed into the battle, killed Morrisons, captured Leger alive, and used all kinds of words to divide the mutiny. He could have controlled this mutiny. Unfortunately, he couldn't. He could only hide behind his personal guards. His decision-making ability wasn't very good either. He actually used military law to threaten the soldiers. What was the use of that? Not only was it useless, it even intensified the conflict, making every soldier want to kill him. Soon, Rudolph's personal guards were all killed, leaving him alone. Leger wasn't in a hurry to kill Rudolph. Instead, he slowly approached Rudolph. Rudolph was scared out of his wits and wasn't as stubborn as before. He knelt on the ground and smiled. A soldier rushed forward and kicked Rudolph. However, Rudolph quickly got up and knelt on the ground again with a smile. For a high-ranking commander, perhaps he would never have the chance to encounter a mutiny among the lower-ranking soldiers in his entire life. Rudolph did not know the severity of the situation at first, but when he saw his personal guards being killed one by one, he felt afraid. He hurriedly ordered his personal guards to put down their weapons in an attempt to resolve the conflict. This action was too stupid. In the end, his personal guards did put down their weapons, but the soldiers did not let them go. Right now, Rudolph only wanted to live, and he was willing to pay any price for it. However, this was an extravagant hope that could never be realized. How could Leger let him go? Leger stood in front of Rudolph. His eyes were bloodshot, and his muscles were tense. He coldly stared at Rudolph. Rudolph knelt on the ground and gestured as if he was trying to justify his actions. Hanjin, Sunir, and the others were too far away to hear anything. However, they could see that Leger extended his hand, and a soldier hurriedly handed him his sword. In the next moment, Leger raised the sword high above his head. In despair, Rudolph fell backwards and used his right hand to block his face. He was still trying his best to explain, but Leger did not want to listen. His sword left an afterimage in the air as it slashed down on Rudolph's neck. Blood splattered everywhere as Rudolph's head flew high into the air. It fell to the ground and rolled a few times, leaving a long trail of blood behind. The soldiers around Leger cheered. Rudolph's death was a symbol of their victory. After taking revenge, Leger revealed a confused expression. From a moment he learned that his father's coffin had been dug up until now. He had been acting on his own initiative. He did not have any plans, and the revenge process was very easy. Now that Rudolph was dead, Leger suddenly did not know what he should do. After the soldiers cheered, they all quietly looked at Leger. Leger did not know what to say. The scene became very quiet, and the atmosphere was very strange. Han Jin and Sunir's expressions changed at the same time. The soldiers were willing to help Leger, and it was a big gamble. They were risking their lives for the descendants of the Legion of Conrad. At this time, even if Leger were to say something crazy like sweeping the continent, it would be better than being at a loss. Otherwise, the morale of the soldiers would be in chaos. The soldiers have placed all their hopes on you. You should at least show them a clear path, right? If you don't know what to do, then who will trust you? Leger, have you forgotten about Lang Ning? Sunir suddenly shouted. He is now imprisoned in the 10th town. He will be executed at noon tomorrow. Leger's body trembled as he angrily shouted, Is there anyone who wants to go with me to save General Lang Ning? Go save a captain. Let's go. Let's see who dares to stop us. The soldiers on the other side all shouted. Sunir's eyes revealed a deep smile. Lang Ning's reputation in the army was very good. His abilities and qualities were excellent. Otherwise, Conrad would not have recommended him to be his successor. If Leger and Lang Ning stood together and supported each other, they should be able to control the entire Riptide. What are you thinking? Why are you smiling so proudly? Han Jin said leisurely. What am I thinking? I am thinking about our future, Sunir replied. At this time, Leger had already walked out of the barracks. The soldiers were still following behind him. Leger ordered the soldiers to stop and then strode towards the giant tortoise. Leger jumped on the tortoise's back. Seeing that there were no soldiers around, he smiled bitterly and asked softly, What should I do now? Are you serious? You don't even know what to do. Sunir was stunned. Han Jin and Sasu shifted their gazes. They did not expect Sunir to know how to act. In fact, from the beginning to the end, Leger had been pushed by the situation and deliberately pushed by the few of them. It would be strange if Leger knew what he should do. I really don't know. First of all, you need to know what will happen to the soldiers. After you leave, there will be other generals to control Riptide. This rebellion, as long as you leave, the nature of this incident will definitely be classified as a rebellion. The soldiers will be severely punished. It is impossible to kill all of them, but at least a few dozen will be executed. Otherwise, who will dare to control these soldiers? Sunir said slowly. Also, you need to bury your parents in a place where no one will know. They already hated the Knight of Conrad to the core. With something like this happening, how could they not take advantage of it? Actually, I doubt that you can guarantee the safety of the Knight of Conrad's remains. Perhaps before you return, the army will have razed Green Garden to the ground. Leger's expression kept changing. Suddenly, a murderous look appeared in his eyes. What if I don't leave? Then it will be much easier. Sunir was waiting for this sentence. In fact, Leger's brain was not inferior to Sunir's. The problem was that he could not calm down. Sunir was right. If he wanted to protect these soldiers and his parents' remains, it was not enough to rely on tolerance and avoidance. He had to have his own forces. Much easier? Yes. Think about it. You have a Beatman's most powerful army. Who would dare to provoke you? Sunir narrowed her eyes. Even if you don't do anything, the city lords will take the initiative to arrange everything properly. For example, the Knight of Conrad and his wife's grave. For example, Riptide's military supplies. What if they don't support me? Do you see those soldiers? What do you think they are holding in their hands? Sunir smiled. Straw? Leger was silent. Sunir smiled and added, The Knight of Conrad had it so hard because he was too righteous. In this world, righteousness is... I don't want to talk about my father, Leger interrupted Sunir. I just want to know, what should I do now? First, you should find the quartermaster or take control of all the military supplies in the barracks. In the battle just now, there were soldiers who died or were injured, right? Not only do the injured need to be compensated, all the soldiers who participated in the battle need to be rewarded. Although they are not siding with you for money, you cannot underestimate the effect of money. Money can make them more united around you. Leger was silent for a moment. Then, he nodded, indicating that he had accepted Sunir's suggestion. Anything else? If there is a first, then there is naturally a second. Sunir smiled. You need to appoint and dismiss all the officers because you cannot rely on yourself to manage 2 cavalry regiments. What you need to do is to control those officers and have them control the soldiers. I also saw that the soldiers had captured a lot of captives. This is a rebellion. What is the use of keeping captives? You can have the newly appointed officers personally kill those captives in front of everyone. By doing so, you will cut off their escape route. Even if the soldiers are scattered, they will not leave you. We are not soldiers. We will definitely be ostracized by the soldiers of Riptide. That is why we cannot come forward to help you. Doing so could have a negative impact. In fact, there is no need for you to worry. Just do your best. You are Conrad's son. The soldiers trust you and rely on you. Even if you do something wrong, they will think that you are right. What are you worried about? An army without goals and ideals is very dangerous. Your first goal is to rescue Langning. As for the future, that is up to you and Langni to decide. Sunir said a lot in one breath. Leger gave Sunir a deep look before turning around and jumping down from the turtle's back. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 106. In summary, Lang Ning's crimes are grave and unforgivable. Sentence Lang Ning to death. Immediate execution. A middle-aged man in a red robe stood up. He was thin and had a dignified aura. Lang Ning, do you have anything else to say? Lang Ning was a general who became famous at a young age. When he joined the army, he was only 13 years old. When he was 15, he became a squad leader. When he was 17, he was recognized by the Knight of Conrad and was promoted to captain of the 1st Cavalry Brigade. It was also at that time that Conrad said in public that Lang Ning was his most suitable successor. This kind of experience was rare even among the legendary figures of the continent. Lang Ning became famous too early. When Conrad died of illness, the Castellans easily rejected the possibility of Lang Ning taking over. Their reason was very good. Lang Ning was only 21 years old. He was too young to convince the public. In the past few days, Han Jin had heard a lot about Lang Ning. In all the versions of the story, Lang Ning was a tough person. Han Jin thought that Lang Ning's face must be very mature. However, in reality, Lang Ning looked very young and very handsome. In Morrison's words, that guy was only slightly worse than Raphael, but his expression was too stiff. He was not as kind as Raphael. Morrison's was talking nonsense. Lang Ning was now tied up and sentenced to death. Who could laugh at this time? Lang Ning, do you have anything else to say? The dignified man repeated. Lang Ning snorted and gently closed his eyes. The 2 warriors behind Lang Ning let out a sigh of relief. In fact, to prevent Lang Ning from talking nonsense, the firing squad tied a few coils of iron wire around Lang Ning's neck. Lang Ning would not be able to breathe if the 2 warriors reached out with their hands. As for shouting in protest, that was impossible. Lang Ning knew that it was useless to struggle and shout. He could only close his eyes and wait for death. At this time, the sound of horses galloping came from outside the town. The nobles on the wooden platform and a few officers were stunned. The people below began to whisper, "My lord, this is bad." A soldier in crooked armor rushed over on his horse. It's the 1st and 2nd Cavalry of the Riptide Regiment. Riptide? The dignified middle-aged man was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he shouted, "Execute him immediately. What are you waiting for?" Several warriors hurriedly pushed Lang Ning to the center of the wooden platform. One of the warriors reached out and grabbed the rope. After testing it, he put the rope around Lang Ning's neck. If it were a normal person, it would not be so troublesome. Everything would be over with just a swing of the sword. However, Lang Ning's father was the former deputy commander of Riptide. He was born in a military family. The execution was to leave Lang Ning's body intact. It was also a kind of dignity. A strange thing happened. As soon as the warrior put the rope around Ronning's neck, the upper end of the rope drooped down softly. The cut was very smooth. It must have been cut by someone. Before the warrior could shout, he heard the voices of two people talking. "What do you think? I didn't guess wrong, did I?" A handsome young man said, "This is nothing. If you have the ability, then guess how many pieces of bread I can eat tonight." Another tall man shouted with a face full of dissatisfaction. "Not even one piece." The young man's face suddenly turned cold. He shouted, "Thomas, how dare you? You know that Leger controls Riptide and is coming with his cavalry. How dare you kill Leger's best friend? Aren't you afraid that Leger will destroy your 10th town?" A group of warriors rushed to Hanjin and Morrison's with weapons. On the wooden platform opposite the gallows, two magicians began to chant spells. However, what Hanjin shouted stunned everyone. "Leger!" Thomas's face changed. Then he sneered. "He dares. The commander of Riptide's cavalry is General Rudolph, not Leger. Men, kill all these bandits for me." The warriors on and off the gallows shouted, but no one really rushed to Hanjin and Morrison's. Even the magicians on the wooden platform were stalling for time. Everything could be fake, but the thunderous sound of the horses' hooves couldn't be fake. "Idiot, do you think Leger is the same as his father?" Hanjin made a gesture. Morrison's grabbed Lang Ning and said, "The Knight of Conrad was a righteous man all his life. What happened to him in the end? Even his coffin was dug out. After seeing all this, do you really think Leger won't change his mind?" On the other side, Morrison's quickly tore the ropes off Lang Ning. Lang Ning was about to say something, but Morrison's signaled Lang Ning to keep quiet. As if to prove Hanjin's words, hundreds of knights rushed in like a whirlwind. Leger was at the front, and hundreds of knights left the main group and went to other streets. The crowd around the gallows dispersed. Leger looked up at Lang Ning with a faint smile on his face. He slowly urged his horse to move forward. Lang Ning was also looking at Leger. His expression and eyes showed how excited he was. "Stop! This is the execution ground. You can't go near it." The executive officer braced himself and stood in front of Leger's horse. Leger looked down at the executive officer with a smile on his face. He then waved his hand. The knight beside Leger suddenly urged his horse to charge forward. F***CK off. Before he finished cursing, the executive officer's head flew into the air. The prisoner who was supposed to be executed was still alive, but he, the executive officer, was the first one to die. This sword strike shocked both sides. Thomas, who was on the wooden platform, couldn't believe his eyes. Ronnie was also dumbfounded. "Leger, are you crazy?" An officer sitting beside Thomas suddenly jumped up and roared. No, I'm very sober." Leger smiled. "However, I know that there are people who conspire to murder my brother, so I acted a little too agitated. This should be forgiven, right? Leger, make it clear. Who conspired to murder your brother?" Thomas knew that he couldn't give in at this time. The more afraid he was, the worse the situation would become. Lang Ning deserved to be sentenced to death. Bullshit. In our 9th town, there are countless young ladies who are chasing after our captain. Rape? I'll rape your mother. Nonsense. I think it's the women in your 10th town who raped our captain. Call them out and explain it clearly. Who raped who? Our captain has been with us for the past few days. How could he come here and rape a woman? Damn it. Does our captain need to rape a woman? Young Marshal, don't listen to them. They are framing our captain. Kill them. The knight's shouts became louder and louder and finally converged into the same sentence. Kill them. Kill them. On the wooden platform, the expressions of the nobles and officers changed again and again. Leger slowly reached out his hand, and the roaring of the night stopped abruptly. Lang Ning's eyes flashed with a strange light. He knew very well that this meant that Leger had a strong control over the soldiers. In fact, "You're really stupid to frame my brother with the accusation of rape." Leger smiled. His tone was very gentle, as if he was making some kind of kind criticism. I grew up with my brother. I don't know about other things, but I remember one thing. My brother has never been short of women. On the contrary, since he was a teenager, he has been having headaches because of those pestering women. Rape? Haha, may I ask who planned this? Don't worry, I mean no harm. I'm just curious. The faces of the people on the wooden platform became very ugly. In fact, they all knew that it was General Rudolph's idea to get rid of Lang Ning. Lang Ning himself was very innocent. Thomas angrily said, Leger, you are not qualified to talk to me. Where is Rudolph? Tell him to come to see me. You want to see General Rudolph? Leger's face was a bit strange. In fact, it's the same to talk to me. Talk to you? Who are you to talk to me? Thomas looked at Leger with disdain. Since he had already offended Leger, he could only offend him to the end. With Leger and Lang Ning's abilities, they could only persuade the soldiers of the 1st and 2nd Cavalry to cause trouble. Rudolph was the commander of the cavalry, so he could definitely suppress Leger and Lang Ning. Even if he couldn't suppress them, there were still other commanders. Conrad had already been dead for a few years, so what was Leger? Leger sighed and jumped off his horse. He walked straight to the wooden platform. His smile was still very kind, but Lang Ning already knew that something was wrong. Leger was a person who rarely showed his emotions on his face. He had smiled too many times today. The officer beside Thomas hurriedly stepped forward and blocked Leger's way. His hand was still on the hilt of his sword. The surrounding knights were in an uproar. They pulled out their weapons and rushed toward the wooden platform. The officer was so scared that his face turned pale. He hurriedly took a few steps back. As for the two magicians, they had long become obedient lambs. What are you doing? Thomas stepped back. Don't you want to talk to General Rudolph face to face? I know where he is. I'll send you there. What? You killed him? Thomas looked like he was struck by lightning. I had no other choice. He had already colluded with Zagund of Black Raven City. Don't you think he deserved to die? Leger was talking about one of the crimes that had caused his father's coffin to explode. The officers wanted to say a few good words, but when they heard that Rudolph had been killed, they were all turned into statues. Leger even dared to kill Rudolph. What else did he not dare to do? There was a blackout. I had nothing in my house. I threw away all my lighter and matches. I couldn't even find my mobile phone. The door was locked from the inside. I could only give up. Finally, I went to my bedroom to sleep. When I woke up, the electricity came back, but it was already 11 o'clock. I wanted to cry. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 107. His hand rose and the knife fell. Thomas clutched his chest and slowly fell to the ground. Even in death, he could not believe that this scene was real. As the mayor of the 10th town, Thomas was a man of real power. Except for several castellans and a few generals, he was the mayor of these important military towns. No one would have thought that Leger would ignore Thomas's identity and kill him without hesitation. Han Jin had said that Leger's mentality must have changed. This was normal. Conrad had passed away too early, and Leger was already grieving. After all, he had gone through so many things. It would be strange if his mentality didn't change. However, Leger's actions were indeed a little too extreme. Everyone on and off the stage was silent as they watched Thomas wobble and fall to the ground. After a long while, the knight began to shout. Some people were comparing Conrad and Leger in their hearts. If Conrad encountered such a thing, he would definitely follow the procedures, such as fighting for the right of arbitration. However, Leger's approach was very extreme and full of the spirit of a bandit. But for the soldiers, Leger's approach was more exciting. The former was the style of an official, while the latter was the style of a man. If you want to kill me, I'll kill you. The officers on the wooden platform all shrank back and let Thomas be killed in front of them. The situation was more important than the person. Whether they showed up or not, they couldn't change the result. What's more, their subordinates hadn't arrived yet. Obviously, they were stopped by the Knight of Riptide. That was to say, the number of Riptide soldiers who had arrived in the 10th town today was definitely more than what they saw. Leja wiped off the blood on his dagger as if there was no one around, and then walked down from the wooden platform. He was still thinking about his father's coffin. Now that he had achieved his goal, he didn't want to stay in the 10th town any longer. With a shout, he rushed out of the town with the knights. You have to dig up the roots when you cut the weeds. Han Jin, who was at the back of the group, sighed. He saw a young man behind the wooden platform with flames of hatred in his eyes. He tried to rush down from the balcony several times, but he was held down by his companions. The problem was that Leger could find some far-fetched reasons to kill Thomas. Thomas had nothing to do with Han Jin. If he wanted to do something, it would be like a dog try to catch a mouse. Not only would Thomas not appreciate his kindness, but he would also blame him for causing trouble. Asterisk, 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 at dusk, the cavalry that had been traveling for a day and a night set up camp in a forest. In fact, no one brought any supplies. The so-called setting up camp was just finding a clean and sheltered place to lean on their horses and rest for a while. Lang Ning proved the knight of Conrad's vision with his actions. Whether he agreed or disagreed with Leger's extreme actions, he quickly got into his role and was the first to talk about his true thoughts in order to eliminate the estrangement between them. Han Jin looked on coldly from the side. He realized that Lang Ning was very clear about his position. After talking for a long time, Lang Ning never tried to redeem Leger's influence. This was very important and had a profound meaning. If Lang Ning tried to ease the conflict, it meant that Lang Ning thought that there was a better way. At least, it was better than Leger's way. In other words, Lang Ning subconsciously placed himself on the same level as Leger. He just let Leger have the upper hand. Therefore, he hoped that everyone could recognize Leger's mistake and take his opinion seriously. However, Lang Ning's performance was impeccable. After jumping off the gallows, Leger and Lang Ning excitedly hugged each other, proving that they had a deep friendship. Lang Ning had always been well-behaved in front of Leger. All his suggestions revolved around the established facts. To put it simply, what Ronning proposed was what to do when things got bad, and what to do when things got worse, and what to do when things got worse. Perhaps he had already realized that after Leger killed Thomas, the conflict between him and the other Castellans had become irreconcilable. Any unrealistic idea was a betrayal. Lang Ning's central idea was to seize power. He wanted to use all kinds of methods to seize power and seize power at all costs. He also placed the names of the commanders and generals in front of everyone, pointing out which ones were the direct subordinates of the previous Legion commander and could be trusted, which ones were promoted by the previous Legion commander and could be trusted to a certain extent, which ones were the neutral generals and should be wary of, and which ones were the subordinates of the other Castellans and must be eliminated. Even though Lang Ning was only the commander of the 1st Cavalry Brigade, he knew the entire situation in Riptide like the back of his hand. He sat there and spoke with assurance. However, as the host, Leger felt a headache coming on and used this as an excuse to leave quietly. "Why did you come out?" Han Jin raised his head and saw Leger. He couldn't help but ask in surprise. "I came out to get some fresh air. It's too stuffy there." Leger smiled bitterly and moved closer to Han Jin. The forest was very quiet, with only the occasional neigh of a horse. There were a few figures moving around on the side of the road. They were the knight in charge of the night watch. Because they had been running for a whole day and night, the knights were very tired and fell asleep as soon as they lay down. "Do you feel that Lang Ning's suggestion is a little unacceptable?" Han Jin asked softly. "No." Leger shook his head and sighed. "It's too tiring." "Tiring? You haven't done anything yet. You're already tired." I think I'm really not suited for this." "Whether you're suited or not, you have to persevere," Han Jin said. "Otherwise, what will happen to the villagers in the Green Garden? What will happen to the soldiers?" Leger bit his lips but didn't say anything. "If you feel tired, it has to do with your mentality." Han Jin thought for a moment. "I remember a time ago, I heard a bard say that despicable is the passport of the despicable, and noble is the epitaph of the noble. A bard? Was it Sassu who said that? How could it be him? Han Jin smiled. However, that bard's understanding is too shallow. The real world is not like what he described. Noble is the passport of the despicable, and despicable is often the epitaph of the noble. Leger was shocked and stared blankly at Han Jin. Think about Rudolph, and think about your father, the Knight of Conrad. They're the best proof. Han Jin smiled. Rudolph said that your father was a traitor and made up many other crimes. In the end, he said that he couldn't stand it and exposed your father out of righteous indignation. Ha! What kind of person did Rudolph make himself out to be? He was a noble and righteous warrior. What about your father? His tombstone will be engraved with the words traitor. If he didn't come back, no one could change the result. A few hundred years later, perhaps everyone would think that your father was a despicable traitor. I know why you feel tired. You don't want to ruin your father's reputation. Am I right? When you killed Thomas this afternoon, you thought that it was the best way to warn all the enemies with bad intentions. At the same time, you gave Lang Ning and the Knight of Conrad an explanation. But now, you're starting to regret it. You think that you made a big mistake and created a crisis for everyone. You also damaged your father's reputation for integrity and loyalty. Although you are not completely right, but it is close. Leger smiled bitterly again. You want to protect your friends, these soldiers, and the villagers. You also hope that the Knight of Conrad's reputation will not be affected by your actions. Don't you think that your expectations are too high? Then what do you think I should do? This kind of thing, I can't give you any advice. Anyway, I am used to following my heart. As long as your heart thinks that you are right, then you can continue to do it. That way, you could be unrestrained. Han Jin said softly. Suddenly, there was a burst of laughter. This person who kept saying that he wanted to be unrestrained had a strange look on his face. Lang Ning and Sunir chatted happily. The two of them were proficient in military affairs. One of them was the commander of the Great Escape, while the other was the captain of a cavalry unit. They were both very young. Furthermore, one of them had long heard of the other's reputation, while the other knew that the other had once been the commander of the heroic unit. They had a lot to talk about between them. Lang Ning and Sunir chatted happily, but Han Jin, who liked to be unrestrained, was unhappy. Especially just now, when Lang Ning said something, Sunir suddenly burst into laughter and clapped her hands twice. Obviously, Lang Ning's words had resonated with her. Seeing this, Han Jin had the urge to beat someone up, but he quickly woke up. What's wrong with me? There was another burst of laughter. This time, it was Sunir who said something that made Lang Ning laugh and cheer loudly. Han Jin finally found an excuse. He slowly walked to Sunir and Lang Ning's side and whispered, "Everyone is sleeping. Be quiet." Sunir blinked. The serious Han Jin in front of her gave her a strange feeling, but she didn't think too much about it. She only nodded to indicate that she understood. Morrison's, who was sitting far away, bumped Sassu with his shoulder and laughed. "Hee, did you see that? You're still in the mood to laugh?" Sassu said helplessly. "If this goes on, something might happen." "What would happen?" Morrison's was stunned. "If someone were to pursue Sylvia, what would you do?" "Huh, this is a great thing for me. I've finally regained my freedom." "Really?" Sassu asked indifferently. "Nonsense, of course it's real." Morrison's tone was very decisive, but his expression was very unnatural. On the other side, Han Jin was already walking back. He couldn't order the two to separate, could he? There was another burst of laughter behind him. Han Jin turned around and saw that he had made a fool of himself. Because he wanted to talk softly, Sunir and Lang Ning were even closer to each other. Han Jin punched an old tree gloomily. At the same time, he was reflecting. He didn't have any special feelings for Sunir. What was going on? Was it because no one had talked to Sunir so intimately, so he didn't feel anything? To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 108. The reason why legends were so attractive was that bards understood people's preferences and natures very well. Of course, the stories they told were all based on real historical facts. Fabricated stories had no vitality. However, bards had their own unique tricks in telling stories. The most common one was to condense a story that happened over a long period of time, or even a year, into a day or a few days, regardless of time and space. For example, when the abyssal race was wreaking havoc on the Earth, the living space of the various races on the Earth's surface was greatly reduced. The huge underground city under the Holy Crown City was the masterpiece of the abyssal race. Vampires, black crows, and other creatures were all remnants of the abyssal race. When the intelligent races on the Earth's surface were overwhelmed by the abyssal race, Abraham, the god of war, appeared out of nowhere and played an irreplaceable role in several decisive battles that determined the life and death of the abyssal race. Finally, he drove the abyssal race back to the underground. In legends, the experience of Abraham, the god of war, had been completely deified. Yesterday, he had just shown his talent by leading the army to defeat the invasion of the abyssal race. Tomorrow, he would begin the great counterattack. It seemed that Abraham had accomplished one miracle after another in a few days, but in fact, the war between Abraham and the abyssal race had lasted for 17 years. If Leger was also qualified to be the protagonist of legends, then his act of killing Thomas, the mayor of the 10th town, will be described by bards as a magnificent feat or a brilliant starting point. Then, Leger would have the power not inferior to the four Castellans. Tomorrow, Hanjin's small group would become the de facto master of the Bite Man. However, in fact, the conflicts would not break out so quickly. Various forms of open strife and veiled struggle also needed a lot of time to prepare. Lang Ning had sent many messengers to the commanders and generals of Riptide with different contents. If it was the direct descendants of the Legion of Conrad, Lang Ning would focus on Leger's grief and determination. If it was the generals who were appreciated by Conrad, Lang Ning would shift the focus to the humiliation of the Knight of Conrad's remains. He would also say that a new funeral for the Knight of Conrad would be held in the near future, and he hoped that the generals would bring their people back to attend. If it was the generals who could be his enemies or friends, Lang Ning would spend a lot of time denouncing Rudolph's shamelessness and vigorously denouncing the four Castellans of the Bite Man for their evil politics. As for those who were destined to be his opponents, Lang Ning was too lazy to waste his energy on them. They were no longer children. Political conflicts could not be distinguished by simple justice and evil. Just like his opponents, they would not care about what kind of person the Knight of Conrad was. They would just do what they should do. It would take at least 7 or 8 days for Lang Ning's letters to be delivered to the generals. It would take them about a month to think it through and decide their position before they wrote a reply to Lang Ning. That was to say, the first step of the war would take a whole month to prepare. Han Jin and the others were living a very happy life. In Morrison's words, there was someone behind them. Leger was respectfully called the Young Marshal. He was definitely the uncrowned king of the 9th town. Morrison's often put his arm around Leger's shoulder, so there was no need for him to be afraid of anyone in the 9th town. Therefore, Moxink believed that he had the right and duty to fall into depravity. He would eat the best food and drink the best wine. As for playing with women, of course, he would choose the youngest and prettiest barmaid. Unfortunately, it often turned into a farce later on. Sylvia's sense of smell could only be described as magical. No matter how drunk Morrison's was in the bar, Sylvia would not appear. However, as long as Morrison's called the bargirls to accompany him, it would not take long for Sylvia to stand behind Morrison's coldly and make Morrison suffer. In fact, when it came to this kind of thing, women had their own reasons and men had their own reasons. No one was right or wrong. After a few times, Morrison's learned his lesson. He only minded his own business and did not flirt with the bargirls. On this day, Han Jin and Morrison's went to a bar in the town. Han Jin just came out to relax, so he went back after sitting for a while. Morrison's, on the other hand, did not have enough fun and continued to stay in a bar. There were not many mercenaries in the 9th town. Most of the customers in the bar were officers from Riptide. there were not many locals. Because of the limited number of customers, the competition between the bars was very fierce, and the variety was endless. Now, several bar girls were standing on the tables, swaying their waists and lifting their skirt from time to seduce the officers below. The officers made a series of strange cries and jeers. Riptide's military discipline was very strict, but such things were not restricted by the rules. The fundamental desire of life must be vented, otherwise it would distort people's character. Those who forced others to eliminate their desires in the name of justice and justice were usually despicable and shameless. They only asked others to do what they wanted, but they never set an example. Morrison's drank the last mouthful of ale and threw a dozen silver coins on the table. He still had to practice his sword skills tomorrow, so he should go to bed early. At this time, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man in even more ordinary clothes stood in front of Morrison's. He smiled and said, "You're from Morrison's University, right?" "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" Morrison's looked up and down at the man. "Can I sit down and talk?" "Yes, sit down." Morrison's waved his hand. The middle-aged man sat down and said, "I heard that you're a straightforward person, so I won't beat around the bush." "I do like it that way." Morrison smiled. "Here's the thing. I have a batch of goods that need to be sent to 12th Town. I've been looking around the town for a while, but I couldn't find a suitable mercenary." The middle-aged man paused and said, "Can you help me?" "Don't worry. You don't have to worry about the commission. Just tell me. I'll satisfy your request as long as it's within my means." "You'll give me as much as I want?" "You're quite confident." Morrison's grinned. "Of course. You won't embarrass me on purpose, will you?" The middle-aged man smiled. "Don't you think you should introduce yourself before we talk about business?" Morrison's said in a low voice. "My name is Justin. I'm the head of Biteman Morgan and Company." "Morgan and Company?" Morrison's almost bit his tongue. "Yes. Is there anything wrong?" Justin asked in surprise. "Nothing." Morrison's snapped his fingers and signaled the barmaid to bring a dozen more ale. He sipped the ale and looked at Justin without saying a word. Justin wasn't in a hurry. He just looked at Morrison's quietly. "You want to send your goods from here to 12th Town, right?" "Yes." Morrison's thought for a moment and said, "It's more than 100 miles away. How about this? 200 gold coins." Justin was stunned. He smiled bitterly and said, "My lord, I just want peace of mind. There are no bandits on the road. Isn't the price too high? You think I care about this little bit of money?" Morrison's raised his thumb and said, "I'm just bored and want to go out for a walk. If I'm short of money, I could just ask Leger and I'll get as much as I want." I know. Justin was a bit embarrassed. In fact, he really wanted to say yes, but the price was too high. Although Morrison's looked silly and easy to fool, he would definitely be suspicious when he sobered up. "If you agree, we'll sign a contract. If you don't, you can sit somewhere else. Don't disturb me from watching the show." Morrison's University said casually, "My lord, actually, you don't need to send the goods to 12th Town. Just send them to Merlin New Village." "Merlin New Village? It's only about 60 miles away from 9th Town, right?" Yes. Then 200 gold coins is indeed too high." Morrison's thought for a moment and said, "How about 100 gold coins?" Justin opened his mouth, but what he wanted to say turned into a bitter smile. "Well, okay, but let me tell you first. I'll pay you 100 gold coins. No matter how many people you ask, I can only pay you 100 gold coins. Why do I need to ask for help for such a trivial matter? Besides, 100 gold coins is not enough to share. I can do it alone." That's good. Justin took out a cloth bag from his bosom, looked around, and carefully counted out 50 gold coins. "This is your deposit. After you send the goods to Merlin Village, I'll pay you the rest of the money. We should sign the contract now." Morrison's rummaged through his clothes. It's okay. Justin smiled apologetically. "No." Morrison's was surprised. "I should at least write you a receipt, right?" "Haha, who are you? Why would you care about such a small amount of money? Besides, we'll have opportunities to work together in the future." Justin smiled. "Well, okay, it's a deal." Justin stood up. "My lord, my goods will leave tomorrow morning. Where should I wait for you? In such a hurry? Which gate will you leave from?" "The south gate, of course." I'll wait for you at the south gate tomorrow morning. Morrison's yawned as he spoke. Okay, then please rest early. Justin nodded repeatedly, and then said a few more polite words before walking out of the bar. Moxink lazily put away all the gold coins on the table. Then he raised his glass, put one hand behind the glass, and carefully looked at his image on the glass. He murmured in a very low voice, "Great Moxink, do you really look so silly?" Chapter 109. Early in the morning, when a caravan of more than 60 carriages approached the south gate, Morrison's came out of a roadside bar to greet them. He reeked of alcohol, and his eyes were red. It seemed that he hadn't slept all night. Morrison's University, you're a man of your word. Justin poked his head out of a carriage and smiled. Nonsense. Who do you think I am? The Morrison's University representative said casually. He looked around and said, So many carriages? Your caravan is quite large. Huh, it's not bad in Ninth Town. Justin laughed. But it's not good outside. It's a second-rate caravan at best. Don't be modest. I've heard of Morgan and Company. If Morgan and Company is only a second-rate caravan, then there aren't many first-rate caravans on the continent. Morrison's stepped into the carriage. But I heard that Dismark is jealous of Morgan and Company. He ordered to confiscate all the property of Morgan and Company. Is it true? Well, Justin hesitated and smiled bitterly. My lord, this is an internal matter of our caravan. I can't talk about it outside. I see. Morrison's laughed and changed the topic. What are you transporting this time? Food and clothes. Justin said seriously. The vampires invaded the Bite Man on a large scale. I don't know how many people they killed and how many villages they destroyed. Alas, a large number of refugees gathered in West Town. Castellan Winston ordered to buy food and clothes at a high price to solve the problems of the refugees. Haha, this is the Castellan's call. As merchants, of course, we have to support him. Aren't you going to send the goods to 12th Town? Yes, these goods are only prepared by one of our branches. Many other branches are also buying food and clothes. 12th Town is our rendezvous point. After the goods are sent there, we don't have to worry about it. Someone will take care of the goods to West Town. If only the merchants on the continent were as righteous as you. Morrison sighed. Many people look down on businessmen. They think that businessmen are all about profit. Justin showed a helpless expression. Actually, they're too one-sided. Our job is to buy low and sell high, and earn the price difference. If we don't seek profits, then what do we eat and drink? If we starve to death, will anyone pity us? Yes. Morrison's replied casually. They don't know the pain of merchants. Waking up early and sleeping late, constantly rushing about, not to mention the hard work, you have to endure all kinds of pressure and threats. Justin smiled bitterly and said, My lord, you also know how chaotic this continent is. Our caravans sometimes have to pass through the territories of several lords in succession. If there is any accident, it will lead to disastrous consequences. No matter where we go, there must be a big shot to receive and take care of us. Otherwise, our belongings will be confiscated and our guards will be killed. This kind of thing happens all the time. Who can we go to? Hearing you say that, I'm suddenly a little worried. Morrison's lifted the curtain and looked outside. The caravan is too long. I'm afraid I can't take care of everyone. How about this? I'll go find a few more people. My lord, what are you worried about? Justin smiled. You only need to escort us to Merlin Village. That place is under the jurisdiction of Ninth Town. Within the range of Riptide's control, who dares to trouble you? That is fine. Moxink shrugged his shoulders. His expression looked normal, but he was cursing Justin in his heart. What a bully, he thought to himself. There was a skill in cursing. At least, one had to choose the weak points to attack. For example, if one cursed Hanjin as an ugly monster or Morrison's as a dwarf, would the people who were cursed be angry? Impossible. On the contrary, they would think that the person who cursed was mentally ill. After Morrison's told Hanjin and Sunir what happened that night, it was no surprise that everyone laughed. The merchant did not look for anyone else but Morrison's. He also intentionally or unintentionally discouraged Morrison's from seeking help from his companions. His intention was obvious. He thought that Morrison's was the most stupid and gullible. Now, Morrison's was trying to prove that Han Jin and the others were wrong, but the result was unacceptable. Therefore, Morrison's was now very angry. The consequences were very serious. The caravan was approaching the sentry post at the entrance of the town. The shouts of the soldiers came from outside. Justin smiled. "My lord, it's time for inspection. Let's go out and have a look, lest those knight find fault with us." "Okay," Morrison's answered in a low, muffled voice. He lifted the curtain and stood on the shaft of the carriage. He looked forward and shouted, "Who's in charge here today?" "Ah, it's the people from Morrison's University." A few knight hurriedly greeted him. "Why are you here, my lord?" When Leger killed his way into the camp, Morrison's had been fighting by Leger's side. In the eyes of the knight, Morrison's was very close to Leger's young marshal. Even the high-ranking officers personally promoted by Leger would not dare to be rude to Morrison's, let alone a small knight in charge of guarding the entrance of the town. "I've accepted a business. I'm going to escort this caravan to Merlin Village." Morrison said, You better hurry up. Don't dawdle. I still have to rush back today." "Open the sentry post," one of the knights shouted. He then smiled at Morrison's. "My lord, you can go now. You're done with the inspection?" Morrison's was surprised. He then shook his head and said, "Do what you want. It's your right and your responsibility. Don't cause any trouble because of me. It's not good for me or you." "My lord, there are dozens of carriages here. How many people do we have? How long will it take?" The knight laughed. "In this kind of situation, we could just check 1 or 2 carriages." "I see." Morrison's paused. "You guys, go to the Little Widow's place tonight. I'll pay for all the drinks and entertainment. Don't tell me you don't know which Little Widow it is." "How is that possible?" "Ha!" The knight laughed together. The sentry post in front of them was opened. The caravan slowly drove out of Ninth Town. Justin sighed. "My lord, you're so courageous. Usually, they'd have to stay in the caravan for hours. Is the 100 gold coins worth it?" Morrison suddenly asked. "Yes, it's worth it." Justin laughed. Maybe it was because he looked down on Morrison's that he didn't even notice the double meaning in his words. Morrison's realized that he was losing his cool. He laughed a few times to cover up his mistake. It was not his fault. No one wanted to be fooled by others. He already had a lot of self-control by not pulling out his greatsword. When the caravan disappeared into the distance, several figures suddenly appeared near the sentry post. Leger, Han Jin, and Sunir had all arrived. "Young Marshal, we checked the 4 carriages as fast as we could. There was only food and clothes in the carriages. There was nothing else." A knight said respectfully, "Are you sure?" Leger frowned slightly. "Yes, young Marshal." The knight nodded. The food in the carriages, the coachman, and the guards all looked normal. "I think there must be something wrong." Han Jin said in a low voice. "How much can a whole carriage of food be sold for? How much can 10 carriages of food be sold for?" "Hiring Morrison's with 100 gold coins. It's too extravagant." "But what's the problem?" Sunir asked. "How about we follow them? I'm worried about Morrison's." Leger said. Everyone looked at each other. As the young marshal, Leger did not have the steadiness and the big picture that a young marshal should have. He was not interested in military affairs. Whenever Lang Ning came to him to ask for instructions, he always let Lang Ning make the decision himself. However, he was very curious about Morrison's. Just like now, he even suggested that everyone follow them. As the uncrowned king of the Ninth Town, should he stay in the town and take charge of military affairs, or should he go out and monitor a suspicious caravan? This was not a difficult question. Many people could give the right answer. "You should stay here." "We'll go," Sunir said. "Don't forget my profession. No one is more suitable than me." Han Jin and Sunir looked at each other and did not know what to say. Indeed, no one was more suitable than Leger to monitor the caravan. But how should they explain it to Lang Ning? Soon, Moxink and Justin became close to each other. One of them was silly, while the other was trying to make friends with him. There was no danger along the way. Even if there were bandits eyeing the food and clothes, they would not go to Riptide's territory to cause trouble. That would be just asking for death. However, the two men had completely different feelings. One hated that time passed too fast, while the other hated that time passed too slowly. Finally, just before Morrison's was about to go berserk, the caravan finally arrived at Merlin Village. "It's such a pleasure to chat with you." Justin looked out and smiled. "It's a pity that we're going to break up." Morrison's looked at Justin lazily and thought to himself, "Boy, you're safe for now. You know what? Here's your commission. Please check it. Is there anything else for me?" Morrison's weighed the money bag in his hand. "Can I go now?" "Of course. I hope we can work together again next time." Morrison's was a little disappointed. He had already alerted Hanjin and Leger. After causing such a big commotion, it ended just like that? Something was wrong. Justin was about to leave when he noticed Morrison's strange expression. He turned around and asked, "Is there anything else?" "Nothing, nothing." Morrison's laughed. "I just feel that money is easy to earn." He glanced around and found a familiar-shaped jade pendant on Justin's waist. He hurriedly shifted his gaze elsewhere. "Haha, with your status, it's easy for you to do anything." Justin laughed. "I wanted to say something 2 days ago. I thought I could barely get over it. But today, I can't get over it. Liars are not human. I don't know what's wrong with this place, but there's been a power outage for 4 consecutive days. Today was the worst. I waited until 8 p.m. when the electricity finally came back. My machine didn't even pass the power check before the power went out again. I had a good temper, but I couldn't help but jump to the window. Ignoring the threat of pharyngitis, I yelled a dozen times. Then I found my clothes, put them on, and went downstairs. There were already many people gathered downstairs. The power outage was torturous. Children couldn't do their homework or watch TV. Adults couldn't take a shower. The things in the fridge were melting. The fans and air conditioners were just decorations. It was also a rare hot day. Those were all parents who couldn't take it anymore. It was a mass incident. At that time, I was invigorated. I ran around the crowd and tried my best to persuade everyone to call the Power Supply Bureau, the Electricity Bureau, and even the mayor's hotline. I almost organized everyone to set up roadblocks. Of course, this was a matter of principle. I knew the severity of it. How should I put it? Anyway, the municipal facilities and style of work in the north can't compare to the south. But compared to some of the special districts in Shaanxi that have already entered a slave society, it can still be proud. I messed around until 10 p.m. when the electricity finally came back. But in the end, something happened. An internet cafe owner beat up a maintenance worker from the Electricity Bureau. I've opened an internet cafe before, so I know how painful it is. I sympathize. I will finish the 2 chapters today, no matter what. Tomorrow's update won't be delayed either. It's just that it will be delayed. Please forgive me. Chapter 110. Are you sure there's nothing wrong with the goods? Morrison's asked with his eyes wide open. There's nothing wrong with them. They're all food and clothes. That's strange. Moxink rested his chin on his hand and pondered deeply. Hanjin, Sunir, Sasu, and Leger were all here. They sat in a circle. Justin had given them a lot of questions, but they couldn't figure it out. Morrison's, what kind of person do you think Justin is? Hanjin asked slowly. Him? He's just an idiot. Morrison snorted. You want to fight with me? Hee hee. It seems like he's just a nobody. Those people sent Justin to test Morrison's. Yeah. Morrison's nodded. He then realized what Morrison's was trying to say. He said angrily, Raphael, what do you mean by that? You only need to send an insignificant person to test me? I think Raphael has a point. Sunir interrupted. If even Morrison's thinks he's an idiot, then you can imagine how stupid Justin is. You're talking nonsense. Morrison suddenly remembered something. He's wearing a jade pendant. It's the same as the one we saw last time. Do you think he's just a nobody? The same as this one. Hanjin quickly took out the jade pendant from his infinite space ring. It's exactly the same as this one. My eyes can't be wrong. Hanjin and Sunir looked at each other and asked in unison, Who are they? We don't have to think too much. Leger said slowly, If they're just testing us, then they'll come in contact with us later. Ninth Town is in our hands. We just need to wait quietly. You're indeed a high-grade thief. When it comes to patience, no one can beat you, Sasu said with a smile. We can only wait. Han Jin stood up. How about we disguise ourselves as thieves and chase after them? Morrison said, That's a terrible idea. Sunir said bluntly, They're transporting food and clothes this time because they're testing you. They don't want to lose too much. What do you do if you take those things? Morrison scratched his head and quickly changed the topic. By the way, Justin said that a few Morgan and Co. branches in a Bite Man are still running. The situation isn't as chaotic as we thought. That's good news. Han Jin smiled. In the past, we couldn't help Chi Li. Now that we have Leger, haha, we can help Chi Li take back the power that belongs to her at any time. Asterisk, 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 it must be admitted that power was a good thing. If there were reporters in this world who interviewed Han Jin and the others and asked them how they felt after having their own territory, they would give the reporters the same answer. It was very peaceful, very free, and very cool. Han Jin didn't have to hide to do Taoist experiments anymore. Even if the noises and monsters he created alarmed many people, he wouldn't be disturbed. Chi Li could go shopping without any worries. There were mages in the 1st and 2nd Cavalry units. Although there were only 6 mages in total, their knowledge, equipment, and resources were all very standard. For example, they had their own laboratories, their own reference room, and some completed magic array scrolls. Sasu was like a fish in water in this environment. Compared to the environment they used to live in, this was heaven. It was a world that belonged to them. This was the influence of power and influence. One day, Sasu walked out of the house and was about to take a breather in the yard when he bumped into Morrison's and Sylvia. Where are you going? Morrison's was carrying a greatsword. He was sweating all over. It was obvious that he had just practiced swordsmanship. I'm going to the yard for a while. Unfortunately, Sasu was standing at a disadvantage. The smell of sweat almost suffocated him. He was too embarrassed to do anything else, so he could only take a step to the side. Where's Raphael? Morrison's didn't seem to want to let Sasu go so easily. He still stood in front of him, blocking his way. He went out with Sunir. Sasu answered casually. He just wanted to get rid of this guy who was emitting a strong masculine scent. What? He went out with Sunir? Morrison's eyes lit up. He immediately moved closer to Sasu. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with them going out? Sylvia asked curiously. Go away. Women shouldn't butt in on men's business. Morrison's pushed Sylvia into the house impatiently. He didn't care about Sasu's wishes and put his arm around his neck. They walked to the middle of the yard. Sasu, have you noticed that the two of them have been in pairs recently? Morrison's whispered mysteriously. Sasu didn't expect Morrison's to pull him over just to say this. He removed his dirty hand from his neck and asked, What does this have to do with you? How can it not? He stopped Cessation, who was about to turn away, and continued, How can you not care about such a big thing happening in our team? Cessation's face looked very gossipy. Fine. Sasu stood there helplessly. It wasn't that he didn't want to leave, but he didn't have the strength to go back to Morrison's university. What's wrong with them going out together? Didn't they always do that in the past? Sasu asked. That's the problem. Why would the two of them go out together? Where are they going? What are they going to do? Do you know? Morrison's voice became louder and louder. Even Stillberg, who was tidying up on the other side of the yard, stopped what he was doing and pricked up his ears. How would I know what they're going to do? Do you? Huh. Let me tell you, this is the difference between a man and a boy. Morrison's patted Sasu's shoulder proudly, as if saying that Sasu was inferior to him. I'm much better than you. What's with that look on your face? Sasu's face reddened. He couldn't help but raise his voice. Then tell me, what are they going to do? Let me tell you. Actually, the two of them are going to... Before Morrison's could finish his sentence, a sharp arrow pierced the ground in front of Morrison's. Morrison's was stunned. It wasn't because of the arrow, but because he saw Han Jin and Sunir standing not far from the yard. More importantly, Sunir had drawn her longbow again. Han Jin was smiling. He didn't seem angry at all. On the contrary, he seemed to be in a good mood. Han Jin slowly walked into the yard with his hands behind his back. When he passed by Morrison's, he stopped and patted Morrison's shoulder. Morrison's, to be honest, I really admire your courage. With that, Hanjin casually walked past Morrison's. Sunir, Morrison's gulped. He was trying to think of a way to get away with it. Swish! An arrow brushed past Moxing's neck, and the biting wind caused by the arrow aroused a layer of fine goosebumps on Moxing's skin. Morrison's was scared out of his wits. He turned around and ran into the house. Even though he knew that Sunir couldn't hurt him, he knew that he was in the wrong. He didn't dare to face Sunir. He could only take the opportunity to escape. What a boring fellow, Sunir coldly said. No one could see her expression under the mask. However, her gaze was somewhat unnatural. Sunir, you know that I wouldn't discuss such a boring topic with him. Morrison's was holding me back. He wouldn't let me go, Sasu hurriedly explained. Sunir rolled her eyes at Sasu and left the yard. Actually, she wasn't done talking to Hanjin. However, she couldn't continue the conversation now. Sasu finally let out a sigh of relief as he watched Sunir's back. At this moment, Sylvia's voice came from the house. Sylvia was usually very bright and cheerful when she spoke. However, her voice now was filled with a sinister tone. Morrison's, what did you just say? What did I say? Morrison's asked as he peeked out. You set yourself. Don't you know? Sylvia suddenly roared. What did I say? Morrison's didn't back down. Damn it. I was almost killed by that cruel elf. Don't you know how to care for me? Why did you yell at me? What are you yelling at me for? The difference between a boy and a man? Sylvia gritted her teeth. Looks like you're a man now, aren't you? You're a man now, aren't you? What? What man? Morrison's expression changed. The next moment, Moxing's figure disappeared from the door with a whoosh, followed by the sound of fighting. Cessation looked up at the sky and sighed helplessly. Brothers and sisters, why don't you go back to your room and fight? He thought. Leger's figure suddenly appeared at the entrance of the yard. Raphael, Sasu, you're all here. That's great. What's going on inside? Morrison's and Sylvia are fighting. Sasu smiled bitterly. He suddenly noticed that Leger's expression was very serious. What happened? There's something very strange happening outside the town. I think we should go and take a look. Leger said slowly. Is it related to Morgan and Company? Or is it related to the other generals of Riptide? Hanjin asked. Neither. You'll know when you go out with me. Chapter 111. About 10 miles to the east of Ninth Town, hundreds of knights had set up a perimeter near a small forest. Some farmer had also gathered nearby, discussing something in a low voice. In the morning, a few farmer had come here to tidy up a piece of wasteland. While they were busy, they suddenly heard a thunderous sound, and the ground shook violently. Then, they saw a black hole appear in the ground. The farmer was scared and quickly reported it to the knights. Logically speaking, this was not a big deal. The key was that the hole was too big. It had a diameter of about 50 meters, and it was so dark that the bottom could not be seen. It was faintly emitting cold air. Hanjin frowned. The hole was definitely not formed naturally. The wall was very smooth, like a mirror, and it was straight up. The smell coming from the hole made him very uncomfortable. Moxing casually picked up a fist-sized gravel from the ground and threw it into the hole, but there was no response for a long time. The crowd couldn't help but feel astonished that the hole was too deep. Are you crazy? The smell of darkness is so strong here. Are you trying to kill us all? Sasu said angrily. Is it that serious? Morrison said unhappily. I think you should change your profession and become a bard. It's just a hole. Why are you making such a fuss? What do you mean by the smell of darkness? Hanjin was interested in Sasu's words. Sasu glanced at Hanjin. Haven't you heard about the legend of the abyss? It's just a legend. Only you can take it seriously. Morrison's caught Sisu's faulty wording and curled his lips. Listen to Sasu. The legend of the abyss is real, Sunir said. Moxink straightened his neck and was about to say something, but suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his waist. It turned out that Silner had pinched him from behind. He immediately shut his mouth. A long time ago, all the races got along well. Although there were some small disputes, there was never a large-scale conflict. Sassu said slowly, until one day, the Abyss race suddenly rushed to the surface. Their cold-bloodedness and violence brought about earth-shattering changes to the world. The Abyssal race you mentioned is very powerful? Han Jin asked. Their talent is fighting. It is said that it takes at least 10 well-trained warriors to kill an adult tyrant. The ancient records say that the Abyss world is full of blood and violence. As long as the Abyss race can live to adulthood, they are all strong warriors. Those who are weak can only be eliminated. What happened in the end? Although the Abyss race is strong, they are lacking in numbers. Under the threat of extinction, the races on the surface gave birth to heroes who could create miracles. For example, war god Abraham, holy knight Gotha, elf messenger Doreen, mountain king Danton, and at the critical moment, the dragon race also joined the war. Sassu became very excited when he talked about the legends of the past. The Abyss race suffered heavy losses and had no choice but to retreat to the underground. According to the records of the Elven race, the reason for the Abyss race's defeat was an internal rebellion. Sunir said slowly, when the Abyss race's kings fought on the surface, one or more of them united and seized control of the underground. To be exact, the Abyss race was not defeated. Those kings voluntarily gave up the war because they knew that their roots were underground. No matter what the reason was, we won in the end, Sassu said. There is a legend on this continent that whoever can go deep into the underground world and obtain the evil horn will have the power to look down on the entire continent, Leger said. There are people who believe that. Han Jin asked, puzzled. According to his opinion, even if there was such a thing as the evil horn, it should have fallen into the hands of the Abyss race long ago. Why would just sit there and wait for people to get it? Sassu smiled. Since it is a legend, it means that it has been around for a long time. There are bound to be people who believe it. The young Zagund was one of them. When Zagund went, no one thought that he could come back alive. However, to everyone's surprise, not only did Zagund come back from the underground world safe and sound, he also brought back a group of vampires. These are his current vampire guard. With the help of the vampires, he was able to establish such a large foundation. But don't the people on the surface hate the Abyss race? According to what you said, how could Zagund be safe and sound until now? At that time, the races on the surface were able to unite because the Abyss race was too bloody. They attacked all life that appeared in front of them without reason. This made all the races at that time feel a sense of crisis because no one knew who the next misfortune would befall. Sassu said, although Zagund loved to kill, he was not without reason. The people in his territory could not resist his tyranny, and the people in other territories could not taste his bloodthirstiness. Moreover, the situation on the continent is so chaotic now. Without enough benefits, who would take the initiative to attack Zagund, a mad dog that would bite people? Are the Dark Elves also an Abyss race? Han Jin asked curiously. No, we just have different beliefs. Sunir said with some displeasure. Then what is with this big hole? Is it a passage from the Abyss race to the surface? Seeing that Sunir was a little unhappy, Han Jin changed the topic without leaving a trace. This is not the first time this kind of hole has appeared. Some people said that it can lead to the underground world, and some said that it can't. However, the truth is not something that I can know. If it can really lead to the underground world, does it mean that the Abyss race can also come to the surface through it? Even if they can, it won't be now. Sassu shrugged. Then why are you so nervous? Since they don't dare to come up, why are you so anxious? Morrison's muttered at the side. They don't dare to appear on the surface in a large scale, but if there is really an Abyss race below and they are alarmed by you, they can definitely return to the depths of the hole after killing us. The powerhouses in the Abyss are not something that we can fight against now. You can imagine it just by looking at those vampires. Sassu said seriously. Forget it. Let's just seal the hole and leave this place. Seeing that the two were about to quarrel again, Han Jin quickly persuaded. Under Leger's command, the knight ran into the forest, cut down a lot of trees, and dragged them to the side of the hole. Suddenly, Sunir frowned and said, "Wait, don't move." "What's wrong?" Sasu was stunned. "I feel there is someone down there." Hanjin took out a piece of paper from his space ring and folded it into a paper crane. He drew a talisman and hid it on the paper crane. The paper crane suddenly became a living creature, spreading its small wings and silently sliding down the wall of the hole. Everyone took a few steps back and left the edge of the hole. After a while, Hanjin suddenly opened his eyes and said softly, "There is someone down there." "Who is it?" "I don't know. I'll go down and take a look later." Hanjin looked at Leger. Leger understood and called over a few knights. He gave the order in a low voice. The knights dispersed the farmer in the distance, while Sunir and the others surrounded Hanjin. Hanjin had mastered some very special magic. Sunir, Leger, and the others had already reached a consensus. This was everyone's secret, and they had to make sure that no one else knew about it. "Raphael, can you do it by yourself?" Sunir whispered. "Don't worry. Maybe my fighting ability is not as good as yours, but when it comes to escaping, all of you combined are not as good as me." Hanjin laughed. "How about I go down with you?" Morrison smiled mischievously. "I have 2 lives. Even if I jump down, your magic will protect me." Morrison's had been enchanted with the faked Earth corpse for a while now. At first, he didn't feel anything, but after a while, he couldn't help but feel curious. He really wanted to know the specific effects of the spell, but unfortunately, he didn't have the chance to die. "As you wish." Hanjin glared at Morrison's. "If you dare to waste my magic, I won't help you for 3 years." "Why do you need 3 years? How about 3 days?" Morrison's tried to negotiate. Hanjin didn't want to continue arguing with Morrison's. Seeing that the knights had already turned around according to Leger's order, he shrank his body and disappeared into the ground. The next moment, Hanjin appeared underground. He hid behind a huge rock and held his breath, quietly listening to the movements in front of him. "Damn it," an angry voice said. An exasperated voice said, "I told you not to move. Why didn't you listen?" Who would have thought that the magic circle could only be activated once? Another voice argued, "Nonsense. How long has this underground city been sealed?" The person in front said angrily, "Is the energy of the magic crystal endless? Stop arguing." Another voice rang out, "Immediately think of a way to seal this hole." "What can we do? I don't have any magic crystals to replace it anyway. And it's too late. There were many people above just now. They must have noticed us. Let's wait for Master Zagun's anger." At this moment, a pair of blood-red lights rose up and rushed toward the place where Hanjin was hiding. "Enemy!" Black Raven found the enemy. Hanjin touched the ground with his toes and rushed out from behind a rock. He raised his hand and cast a pure light charm. In the white light, he saw 3 monsters standing in front of him. 2 of them looked like humans, but they had a pair of long, twisted horns on their heads and looked extremely ferocious. The last one was a real monster, like a jellyfish floating in the sea. It had an egg-shaped body with a dozen tentacles. Its body was covered with scales, but there were no organs such as eyes, nose, and so on. There was nothing on its body. Chapter 112. What was that? Hanjin felt a chill in his heart, but he still had to weigh the opponent's strength. While releasing the pure light charm, he had also activated the spirit possession art. His body turned into a gust of wind and rushed straight forward. Unexpectedly, the monster with many tentacles let out a series of miserable screams and struggled desperately in the white light. The black crows that were flying towards Hanjin were even more miserable. They either crashed into the cave wall or fell to the ground. With the improvement of his energy, Hanjin's fighting skills were always changing. Because he had mastered too many Taoist methods, his flexibility was unparalleled. At first, he tried to make fire charms, but fire charms were low-level Taoist methods. Although their power had been greatly improved in this world, they were still very limited. For example, last time he used fire charms to attack the middle-aged knight, but the knight didn't care about his attack at all. Absorbing a few fire attribute magic crystals would allow him to create a fire talisman. However, if he were to accumulate all the fire elements, he would be able to create dozens of fire talismans in one go. Then, he would be able to create a 3 true fire talisman. On the surface, it seemed that the latter cost too much, but fire charms could only tickle high-level professions, while 3 true fire could be his life-saving weapon. However, he had to accumulate all kinds of elements to make more advanced charms, which created a blank space. Therefore, Han Jin spent a part of his energy to strengthen his body so that the spirit possession skill could be more powerful. Moreover, he had the faked Earth Corpse. Even if the opponent's strength was too strong, he still had a chance to escape. Seeing that the jellyfish-like monster couldn't withstand the light of the pure light spell, Han Jin suddenly changed the target of his attack. He turned around and punched the monster's egg-shaped body. Now, Han Jin's eyesight had been greatly improved. He could clearly see that the egg-shaped body had a big pit, and then countless green juice sprayed out. Finally, the monster flew out like a cannonball and collided with a long-horned monster behind it. Both of them fell to the ground. The other horned monster roared and swung its fist at Han Jin. Han Jin didn't back down. He swung his fist, and the 2 fists met in midair. Han Jin was just a miscellaneous martial arts expert. He knew a little about martial arts, but only a little. If he was a martial arts expert, he would have many ways to deal with the monster's attack. He could either borrow the monster's strength to fight back, or take advantage of the situation to close in. However, Han Jin couldn't do that. This was also determined by the style of the divine battle technique. The so-called divine battle technique was about using brute force to break through brute force, using brute force to fight brute force, and using offense to attack, turning oneself into an invincible general who would charge forward despite facing tens of thousands of enemies. No matter how strong the opponent in front of you was, you must not be at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. You must maintain a fearless will. If there was fear in your heart, it was equivalent to breaking your own divine battle technique. With a loud bang, Han Jin took a step back, while the horned monster took 4 or 5 steps back. Clearly, Han Jin had the upper hand. Han Jin's figure turned into a blur. With an angry roar, he swung his fist at the horned monster's chest. The horned monster opened its blood-red eyes and swung its fist to meet the punch. However, this time, Han Jin's fist had been released to the fullest extent, while the monster met the attack in a panic. With another bang, the soft armor on the monster's right elbow suddenly broke. A section of white bone pierced through its flesh and the soft armor, protruding out. Han Jin's speed was too fast, and his strength was too strong. The horned monster's arm bone was forcibly broken. Of course, the so-called strong was only in comparison. This kind of pain was unbearable. The horned monster let out a mournful howl. Han Jin's left fist followed up and bombarded the horned monster's bull lips. Its mouth full of snow-white teeth and 2 long fangs broke. The horned monster couldn't help but fall backward and fly away. Han Jin continued to follow up. High in the air above the horned monster, his right fist mixed with the whistling of the wind as it smashed down. With a loud bang, Han Jin's fist bombarded the horned monster's chest. At this moment, the horned monster's eyes suddenly bulged high, but its chest caved in deeply. Blood spurted out from its mouth, nose, ears, and eyes. Its body fell heavily to the ground, splashing up sand and stones. The other horned monster pushed its companion aside and rushed at Han Jin with a roar. Seeing that its companion was beaten to the point where it couldn't fight back, it still dared to continue provoking. Its courage was commendable. The cave suddenly became pitch black. Han Jin's finger lightly moved and released a pure light charm. The horned monster was obviously not used to strong light. When the light lit up, it closed its eyes tightly. After a few exchanges, Han Jin had already understood the strength of his opponent. He didn't dodge or give way. Instead, he punched back. Just as the horned monster's fist was about to land on Han Jin's shoulder, Han Jin's fist had already hit the monster's throat. The horned monster's body suddenly stiffened. It couldn't use any more strength. At most, it grabbed Hanjin's shoulder, and then its body fell down bit by bit. Hanjin's punch had shattered its throat, shattered its blood vessels, and broken its windpipe. No matter how strong a monster was, it could only close its eyes and wait for death after suffering such injuries. Hanjin raised his foot and kicked the longhorn monster in the chest. In the corner, the jellyfish-like monster was struggling to raise its tentacles. Its companion had already flown over and hit it, causing it to let out a series of chirping noises. At this moment, Hanjin suddenly heard a noise behind him. His body abruptly rose from the ground. A red light passed through his afterimage and hit the wall of the cave. A few fist-sized rocks shot out from the wall. Hanjin saw that it was another jellyfish-like monster that had attacked him. He released a levitation spell and flew over the monster. The jellyfish-like monster raised one of its tentacles and followed Hanjin closely. In the dimming light of the pure light spell, Hanjin could clearly see that there seemed to be an eyeball at the end of the tentacle. It had a pupil and could blink. The moment the eyeball turned red, Hanjin kicked the cave wall, and his body suddenly changed direction. A red light shot out from the tentacle, but it didn't even touch Hanjin's shadow. Hanjin swooped down like a goshawk and waved his hand at the top of the egg-shaped body. The tentacle that the monster used to support its body obviously couldn't withstand such a huge force. The egg-shaped body fell down and hit the ground. It first became round, then a horizontal oval. Just when Hanjin felt the resistance of the ground, the egg-shaped body had turned into countless green juice splashing in all directions with a bang. It was like a balloon that had exploded. The cave was plunged into darkness again. There were frightened chirps in the distance. Hanjin cast a pure light spell in the direction of the sound. This was his disadvantage. He couldn't see in the dark. The two jellyfish-like monsters screamed and fled in the white light. Their courage was obviously very different from the two longhorn monsters. However, although they had many tentacles, they didn't run fast. They gave a very hurried feeling, like two women with small feet walking in small steps. Hanjin tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and shot straight more than 10 meters away. Then, he tapped the ground again and caught up with the two monsters. Cha-cha-cha. One of the monsters turned around and screamed in horror. Hanjin kicked the egg-shaped body. The monster howled and flew out, crashing into the cave wall. But before it could touch the wall, its body couldn't withstand the huge force. With a bang, it turned into green raindrops. Hanjin stretched out his foot and stepped on the tentacle of the other monster. The monster fell forward involuntarily, but its tentacles were still moving like a strange spider. Unfortunately, no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't move forward at all. "You are Zagun's people?" Hanjin said coldly. "Cha-cha, cha-cha-cha." The monster used a strange sound to reply to Hanjin. Hanjin looked at the green juice on his body with disgust. He kicked again, and the monster shot straight out like a football. It landed on a giant rock. The scaly skin wrapped tightly around the rock, and the green juice kept flowing down the rock. A few of its tentacles trembled a few times, then stopped moving. Hanjin walked back. There was only one monster left. Hanjin couldn't judge the monster's attack power, but its body was very weak. The densely packed scales looked very tough, but unfortunately, there were no bones inside. It wasn't much stronger than a bubble. The monster had just struggled out from under its companion's body. Its dozen tentacles kept trembling, and it looked very frightened. "Did Zagun send you?" Hanjin asked slowly. "Cha-cha-cha. I know you can speak our language." Hanjin stepped on one of the tentacles and crushed it. "Cha-cha." The monster let out a sharp cry, then shouted, I'll talk. We are an exploration team." "Whose exploration team?" Hanjin raised his foot. "It's Master Zagun's exploration team. He wants to attack this place." Hanjin felt a little nervous. His good days had just begun, and he didn't want to be disturbed. This underground city is too big. Master Zagun asked us to find out where each intersection leads to. Master sent out a total of hundreds of exploration teams, and we are only one of them. How many people are coming in this direction? Only us. How many monsters are there in your exploration team? Monsters? The monster was stunned. Obviously, it couldn't accept Han Jin's title, but it had no choice but to say, there's a total of 6. Han Jin didn't say anything. He didn't know if these monsters left behind any markings. It seemed that he had to take a closer look, but before that, he had to go up and explain to Sunir and the others. Han Jin couldn't see the monster clearly in the dark cave, but the monster could see Han Jin clearly. Seeing that Han Jin seemed to be thinking about something, it quietly raised its tentacles and aimed at Han Jin. It could only be said that it had lost its rationality. It even forgot how obvious the red light on its tentacles was in the dark. Just as it was about to attack, Han Jin had already grabbed its tentacle and pulled it in half. Cha-cha! The monster let out a hiss, then slowly fell to the ground. Their weakness wasn't only their body, but their tentacles were also their weakness. Chapter 113. When Han Jin once again appeared on the surface, the night had already retreated. Only Sunir and the others were left. Seeing Han Jin emerge from the ground, they were already used to it. Only Lang Ning, who had just arrived, was shocked. Sasu asked anxiously, "How was it?" "We encountered a few monsters." "Monsters? What kind of monsters?" Han Jin gave a simple description. Sunir said in shock, "Those are minotaurs and evil eyes. They belong to the Abyss race?" Han Jin more or less understood the strengths of those monsters. "Yes." Sunir paused. "What about those monsters?" "I already took care of them." Sunir was stunned and said seriously, "Raphael, next time you encounter something like this, don't do it yourself. Your combat experience is very poor, and—" "It is very poor," Morrison's interrupted. Han Jin and Sunir rolled their eyes at Morrison's. Sunir continued, "And you don't even know their characteristics. What if something happens?" "I don't have any other choice." Han Jin shrugged. "This hole is straight up and down. You can't come down to help me." "Aya, Sunir is worried about you." Morrison's patted Han Jin's shoulder. It was strange. Perhaps it was because he didn't want the goodies to go to others, or perhaps it was because of something else. But after discovering that Sunir and Lang Ning had a lot in common, Morrison's was very worried about Han Jin. He often tried to matchmake Han Jin and Sunir together. "Where did those monsters come from?" Lang Ning asked slowly. "They're Zagun's subordinates," Han Jin sighed. "I didn't expect that underground city to be so big. You guys go back to the town first. I still have to go down and try to remove the traces left behind by those monsters." "All right. We should control those farmer. We can't let the news leak out." Sunir suddenly remembered something. Otherwise, when Zagun knows that there's a hole that leads directly to the 9th town, he will still send people here. "But," Leger was stunned, and hurriedly said, "I've already sent people to chase those farmer away. When I came here, I met those farmer. I sent people to stop them," Lang Ning said. Han Jin looked at Lang Ning. He didn't know that Lang Ning's style was very meticulous. It was to the point that he didn't have any loopholes. "That's good." Sunir heaved a sigh of relief, and then sighed. "In the future, our situation will become more and more difficult." "Why do you say that?" Morrison's asked, puzzled. "Most of Zagun's subordinates are dark creatures. That huge underground city will become his solid base. We can't fight him in the dark, but he can choose to attack the city on the surface." Sunir said slowly, "Give him some time to recuperate in the underground city, and his strength will increase rapidly." Lang Ning was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly became ecstatic. He grabbed Leger and hurriedly said, "Young Marshal." "I have a great idea." "What? What idea?" Leger rarely saw Lang Ning with such an expression and asked in surprise. "For Zagund, protecting the underground city is his foundation. Am I right?" "Yes, what's wrong?" "Others also know this, including Dismark of the Holy Crown City, the 4 Castellans of the Bite Man, and Zagund's current ally, Lord Mali of the Depew City." Lang Ning said slowly, "No one wants to see Zagund's strength increase. It's said that Lord Mali has slowed down his attack on the Holy Crown City. so that Dismark can deal with Zagund. I even suspect that Molly and Dismark have reached an agreement secretly. Otherwise, how can Dismark have the strength to continuously attack the underground city? What you said has nothing to do with us, right? Morrison's curled his lips. He firmly believed that this guy who dared to hook up with Sunir must be suppressed. No one wants to see Zagund occupy the underground city. Under such pressure, for a long time, Zagund must use all his strength to protect his foundation. Langming's face was full of excitement. So, what will he rely on to protect his Black Raven city? Sunir and the others were stunned. Young Marshal, we must fight our way out. Langming's voice was getting louder and louder. Young Marshal, we are in a very difficult situation here. The Bite Man has been divided for many years, and the Four Castellans' power is deeply rooted. If you rashly start a war, you will become the target of everyone's criticism, because this is equal to helping Zagund. If you only stay in a stalemate with them, compared to this kind of scheming, both you and I are far from being their opponents. Why don't you play to our strengths? Young Marshal, fight your way out. Black Raven City is our hope. Langming's voice echoed in the forest. Obviously, he was extremely excited. The Four Castellans are also worried about you. If you decide to attack Black Raven City, they will definitely support you. Only by sending you away can this place truly become their territory. Moreover, Zagund sent the Vampire Guard to kill Bite Man residents everywhere, which has aroused the anger of the whole city. If you want to attack Zagund's base, the army, and the people will be on your side. Countless people will be grateful and admire you. When we make a comeback one day, even if they don't help us, they won't stand on the side of the Four Castellans. Black Raven City is vast and fertile. It could have become a very prosperous city, but Zagund's cruel nature made Black Raven City what it is today. Moreover, if we choose the right time, not only will we be able to occupy Black Raven City effortlessly, but we will also be able to take a large amount of resources that Zagund has hoarded. Now that the war is spreading everywhere and there are countless refugees, I am confident that after a period of development, Black Raven City will be able to recover. Good. Sunir shouted. Good. Sasu also reacted. Young Marshal, I'm only worried about one thing now. Langming let out a long sigh and said with a smile, What is it? Dismark is very clear about the significance of that underground city, so he must have a very tight control over it. I don't know how Zagund found out about the secret of the underground city. Langming paused. If someone deliberately leaked the secret to Zagund, then I'm sure that the informant is an extraordinary person. He has great ambition, great insight, and is good at planning. Perhaps at this time, he has already set his sights on Black Raven City. Although the situation on the continent is very chaotic now, the various forces have already formed, and there's almost no room for new lords to survive. He actually thought of using this method to seize Zagund's Black Raven City. Young Marshal, this person will become a formidable opponent for us. Indeed, someone deliberately leaked the secret to Zagund. Sunir sighed. You know this person? Langming was shocked. This extraordinary person you're talking about is our prophet, Lord Raphael. Sunir's expression became more and more strange. You. Sasu looked at Hanjin and then at Langming. You're thinking too much, aren't you? Raphael. He recalled that when Hanjin talked about that matter, he was just trying to create chaos. He shouldn't have calculated to this extent. If what Langming said was true, then Hanjin's brain was too scary. However, he couldn't be sure if it was true or not. Perhaps Hanjin really did have such an idea, but just didn't tell them. I only thought you were a magician and a puppet master. I didn't expect you to be such an outstanding. Langni couldn't continue, saying that Hanjin was a military strategist, but he looked like the leader of a small mercenary group, and he had a close relationship with the young marshal. Saying that Hanjin didn't know anything about military affairs, but his plan was too vicious. He gave Zagund a fat piece of meat that Zagund desperately wanted to swallow, and created an impossible opportunity. This was usually described as a miracle. Hanjin laughed dryly. He wasn't stupid, so of course he understood Langming's words. But he really didn't think so far ahead. He couldn't deny it, but he couldn't admit it either. It was more or less awkward. Young Marshal, make your decision. Lang Ning's gaze shifted to Leger. This is the best opportunity for us. Although I don't know how to fight a war, I can understand what you're saying. Leger smiled. Go do it. Yes, young Marshal. Lang Ning replied energetically. Ever since he was rescued by Leger, although he had been doing his best to plan for Leger, he felt depressed about the future. This was because they couldn't start a war for no reason. And if it was just internal friction, he doubted that they could win against those crafty old men. Although those few Castellans were average in terms of military strength, when it came to messing with people, each one of them was more shrewd than the other. And now he saw the hope of flying high. Looking at Lang Ning's back, Leger's gaze fell on Han Jin. Raphael, was it really you? Was it really you who leaked this secret to Zagund? It was him. Sunir, Morrison's, and the others nodded in unison. And at that time, he told us that he wanted to create chaos. But after that, he didn't say what we were going to do. Sunir added, because we didn't have any power at that time. Sassa said, even if he told us, it would have been meaningless. Leger was speechless. Lang Ning's words were still ringing in his ears, and the shock in his heart could not be described with words. I finally understand why Raphael said he wanted to become a lord. Morrison's muttered in a low voice. Raphael, if what Lang Ning said was true, if you really thought of so many things, even if the god of war Abraham was alive, you might not be inferior to him. Sasso stared at Han Jin. All right, we should go back. Sunir looked at Han Jin meaningfully and turned to walk towards the town. Chapter 114. Sir, I'm from Morrison's University, a voice called out. Morrison's turned around and saw two people following behind him. He recognized one of them. It was Justin from Morgan & Company. Justin's clothes were still ordinary, but the other person was much more extravagant. It was already spring, but he was still wearing a cloak made from the feathers of a demon bird. Although it did not match the season, the bright and colorful light attracted people's attention. It also gave him a noble aura. Sir, I haven't seen you for half a month. You look more and more impressive, Justin said with a smile. Really? I didn't notice, but I know my alcohol tolerance is getting higher. Morrison's laughed. When did you come back? I just came back, sir. Let me introduce you. Justin turned around. This is the owner of Morgan & Company, young Master Borg. Young Master, this is the person from Morrison's University that I've often mentioned to you. Hello. Morrison's greeted him warmly. Hello. Borg smiled. This isn't the place to talk, Morrison's University. I know a quiet hotel. Why don't we talk there? What's so good about a hotel? Morrison said. I'm going to the bar anyway. It'll be fun if we talk there. We can also watch a show. The bar is too noisy, Morrison's University. Borg smiled. I have something important to discuss with you, so it's best if we find a quiet place. Is that so? Morrison's hesitated. That's fine. Morrison's might be muddle-headed at times, but if someone treated him like an idiot, he would be the one being played. The reason why he gave in was because he realized that Morrison's had a powerful background. It was not from his clothes, but from his attitude. He had a firm attitude. Only those who thought highly of themselves and were qualified to think highly of themselves would insist on their own opinions. In fact, they could have discussed it anywhere, but they were the ones asking for help, and yet they still had to refute his opinion. This was enough to prove Borg's status. After a while, the three of them walked into a hotel one after another. The hotel was not big, but it was very clean inside. There was no one inside, not even the owner. Obviously, Borg had prepared in advance. Tell me, what do you want? Morrison's University's owner sat on a chair. Do you want me to protect your caravan again? Don't blame me for being nosy. We're friends. How much money can you make by buying food and clothes? Why don't you sell something else? Sir, we want to, but... Borg smiled bitterly. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are hiding in the west side of the city. They have no food and no clothes. Mayor Winston is so worried that he can't sleep. As merchants, we can't bear to see so many people suffer. So you're still buying food and clothes this time? Yes. Borg nodded. Or are you sending them to Merlin Village? Yes. I thought it was something big. Let's do it according to the old rules. Morrison said lazily. Then, he suddenly remembered something and slammed the table. Don't tell me you're going to lower the price? Morrison's eyes widened, as if he was looking at an enemy. Borg was startled. He could not help but laugh. Sir, you're mistaken. This time, we're asking you to escort a caravan made up of more than 100 carriages. While we lower the price, let's do it this way. 200 gold coins. As usual, we'll pay half of it first. When we reach Merlin Village, we'll pay the other half. You should have King said so earlier. You scared me, Morrison's grumbled. Borg was speechless. Who was the one who scared who? He wanted to talk to Morrison's personally, but when he saw this rude guy who only cared about money, he lost all interest in talking. My lord, we have too many goods this time. If we have to check every carriage, perhaps we won't be able to leave even at noon. It's too much a waste of time. My lord, could you discuss with the soldiers and try to let us pass as quickly as possible? Justin continued. You call me here just to say this? Isn't it just a matter of a sentence? Who dares to check my caravan? Morrison's said impatiently. Is there anything else? I still want to go drink. Haha, of course. Who dares to go against you? Justin laughed. He then took out his money pouch and counted 100 gold coins carefully. He placed them on the table. Sir, this is your deposit. Morrison's eyes lit up. He swept the gold coins into a pile. Can't you give me that pouch? How am I supposed to carry so much? I was careless. Justin quickly took out an empty pouch and handed it to Morrison's. Morrison's put the gold coins into the pouch and shook it proudly. He then stood up. However, he seemed to have thought of something and his movement slowed down. He frowned and said, Something's wrong. Borg was shocked. He smiled and said, Sir, what's wrong? How many carriages are there this time? About 180. How dare you trick me? Morrison's threw the pouch on the table. The table shook violently. How many carriages were there last time? You pay me 100 gold coins. How much is it this time? If the journey is the same, you should pay me 300 gold coins. Do you think I don't know how to count? Borg didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he did feel relieved. His vigilance and doubts disappeared. He didn't want to argue with Moxink, so he winked at Justin. Justin hurriedly counted out another 50 gold coins and put them on the table respectfully. My lord, please don't be angry. Please don't be angry. It's all our fault. Justin, let me tell you, your attitude is wrong. You are lying to your friends. Morrison's pointed at Justin's nose and scolded. Damn it. No wonder people say you merchants are cunning. If it was me, Morrison's. If it was someone else, wouldn't they have been fooled by you? Sir, please don't be angry. It's our fault. It's our fault. Justin apologized profusely. How about this, my lord? These gold coins can be considered as our compensation. Okay? Sir, to be honest, we were really careless. We really don't want to lose a friend like you. After that, Justin handed the pouch to Morrison's. Morrison's took the pouch and weighed it in his hand. His face finally calmed down. He said in a low voice, Are you still leaving in the morning? Through the south gate? Yes, sir. Like last time, I'll wait for you there. Morrison's put away the 2 pouches and swaggered out of the inn. Borg looked at Morrison's back. If he knew that this guy was so uncouth, he wouldn't have come. How unnecessary. An idiot, Borg said softly after Morrison's back disappeared. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 2 idiots. Morrison's said with a proud expression. Let me tell you, this time they sent a big shot to contact me. It seemed that he was still holding a grudge about what happened last time. Borg? Han Jin's eyes fell on Chi. Have you heard of this guy? Never. Chi said bitterly. If he was standing in front of me, I would really want to slap him. How dare he say he's the owner of Morgan & Company? Don't worry. You'll have the chance. Han Jin smiled. I've already checked. Last time, someone was buying a lot of food and clothes. But this time, there was no fluctuation in the market. They must have transported something else. Lang Ning said slowly. But more than 180 carriages. Although Ninth Town is a big town, the quantity of these goods is too large. The most strange thing is that not only food and clothes, but also other goods. It's impossible. So, what they want to take away is something that has been hoarded in the town, or something that has been hidden in the town for a long time. Han Jin said lightly, I think it's time to take action. What do you think? I support your opinion. Lang Ming said. Since he learned about Han Jin's past, his attitude towards Han Jin had changed greatly. He respected Leger because of friendship and the past. He respected Sunir because of a good relationship. Now, he respected Han Jin because he knew that if it was him at that time, he would never have been able to think so far ahead. His almost abnormal ability to plan was not only admirable, but also awe-inspiring. Do you think? Han Jin hesitated. Do those guys have anything to do with Rudolph? What can they have to do with him? When Rudolph was alive? Why didn't this happen? When Rudolph died? Why did they rush to transport the goods? Han Jin said, at that time, Leger should have caught Rudolph first. He shouldn't have killed him so early. After all, Rudolph was the commander of the cavalry. If he didn't kill him, other accidents would have happened. Sunir shook her head. What you said should be just a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. Han Jin said. Of course, he couldn't be sure. This was just the result of his deduction. There were other possibilities, but he just felt that this was the most likely one. Han Jin then changed the topic. Tomorrow, we'll split into two groups. Morrison's, Lang Ning, and I will be in charge of seizing their carriages. You guys will be in charge of finding out where the goods came from. With so many goods, they'll need a lot of manpower to transport them. Actually, we can check now. With more than 100 carriages, they'll need a big place to park, right? Leger can do this alone. Sunir said, I will help you guys. No need. Is a cavalry unit not enough to deal with them? Han Jin laughed. I'm telling you, no one is allowed to fight with me. Morrison's gritted his teeth. Leave those two guys to me. Especially that, Justin. It's best not to hurt them first. There are a lot of things we need to get out of their mouths, Han Jin said softly. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.